business, Paul and Lisa.
Nathan Hager, thank you so much for that. And just as a reminder, we are awaiting commentary from Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, as well as Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. Interesting to see what's going on right now in credit in the meantime, because you have sort of dual forces, given the fact that oil prices are falling to the lowest in 17 years. And then you also have concerns about growth. And then you have the Fed trying to backstop the whole thing, which is leading to this jumble with a lot of dire predictions, and yet people still saying it's time to buy, Paul. Sort of this odd moment where there seems to be an opportunity here, but people aren't sure whether they're going to get, just to quote Wall Street speak, their face is ripped off in the process. And someone who's been tracking this really well and has been, frankly, on the ball every time we speak to him is Greg Hahn, who wasn't necessarily as enthusiastic earlier about the enthusiasm we were seeing in the markets, and now joins us, Chief Investment Officer for Winthrop Capital Management. Greg, I'm curious, from your perspective, is this a time of opportunity in the high yield space, or is this a time of growing risk?
So in the high yield space, we have to separate it from the high yield basis, and we take the energy sector out because of what's going on with oil prices. We think the energy sector is going to go through some turmoil, and I think at the end of the day, it's a buyer's market, but you got to do your homework and you got to be selective. But there's some good companies out there that are on sale.
So what are some of the sectors or the companies that are on your screen at the moment?
So we've been focused on the up and quality trades. So away from high yield in the investment grade sector, the new issue market has been extremely active. And where we can buy in the short end has had some serious dislocation. So we were buying 2 and 3 year paper that had yields of 6%, which was just from forced selling. We're also seeing opportunities in the CMBS market, and that's where the problems are going to occur. Is we see, we expect rent payments on the corporate side. We're going to miss rent payments for April. We're going to probably miss them for May, and so we're going to see some deterioration and some increase in delinquencies in CMBS. So that there's forced selling in the CMBS sector that's put a lot of paper out on the street, and that's 8 to 10% kind of yields.
I'm curious. We're going to talk more about this, Greg Hahn. Paul, I believe that Maryland Governor is there.
Yeah, Greg, thanks so much. Right now, we're going to go to the Maryland Governor, Larry Hogan.
Nursing home in Mount Airy, which is in Carroll County, where 67 residents have now tested positive, and 27 members of the staff are also experiencing symptoms. It took nearly 3 weeks for the National Capital Region to go from 0 to 1,000 cases of COVID-19. It took just 3 days for the region to more than double from 1,000 to more than 2,500 cases. The number of cases across Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia have more than quadrupled over the past week, and already 51 people have died. As of this morning, there are 2,709 confirmed cases in the DMV area, which surrounds the nation's capital. There are currently 142,793 cases across America and more than 738,000 cases around the globe. The worldwide death toll has doubled in the past week to over 35,000. And the number of U.S. deaths has doubled to nearly 2,500 in just 2 days. For those who still refuse to take this pandemic seriously, and those who are still downplaying the severity of this crisis, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, said yesterday that we could expect millions of cases in the United States and 100,000 deaths. To put that in perspective, that would mean more American deaths than the Vietnam War and the Korean War added together. This virus is spreading rapidly and exponentially. To researchers and medical experts, they're saying that in 2 weeks' time, the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia areas could look like New York and the tri-state area. At my direction, Maryland has already taken some of the earliest and most aggressive social distancing actions in America in an effort to slow the spread of this deadly virus. Yet despite all of those actions and our repeated warnings for more than 3 weeks, and in spite of the rapid escalation of this crisis across the world, the nation, and our state, some people are still choosing to ignore those executive orders and directives. Those individuals are endangering themselves and their fellow citizens. Anyone engaged in this type of reckless behavior is in violation of state law and is putting the lives of their family, their friends, and their fellow Marylanders at risk. This morning, I have signed an executive order which institutes a stay-at-home directive. No Maryland resident should be leaving their home unless it is for an essential job or for an essential reason, such as obtaining food or medicine, seeking urgent medical attention, or for other necessary purposes. In addition, only essential businesses are allowed to remain open in Maryland, and those businesses must also make every effort to scale down their operations in order to reduce the number of required staff, to limit in-person interaction with customers as much as they are able to, and to institute telework for as much of the workforce as is practical. As we have previously stated, no Marylander should be traveling outside of the state unless such travel is absolutely necessary. If you have traveled anywhere outside the region in recent weeks, you should self-quarantine for 14 days. We encourage not just businesses, but families and friends to make every effort to use remote forms of communication to limit person-to-person contact. Marylanders should reschedule all non-essential appointments of any kind. As we directed 11 days ago, no one should be using any mode of public transportation unless they are essential personnel or unless that travel is absolutely necessary. This is a deadly public health crisis. We are no longer asking or suggesting that Marylanders stay home. We are directing them to do so. This executive order will become effective at 8 p.m. today. All 26 of the executive orders we have enacted in the past few weeks will remain in full force and effect, and we will be enforcing these orders to ensure compliance. In my direction, state and local law enforcement officials have already stepped up their enforcement efforts. Today's order states that any person who knowingly and willfully violates the order is guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction is subject to imprisonment not to exceed 1 year or a fine not exceeding $5,000 or both. In an effort to ensure that this message reaches every single Marylander, and in order to reinforce the critical nature of this order, we will be sending out a wireless emergency alert on all cell phones and mobile devices in Maryland, with a public safety advisory to follow this stay-at-home directive. This is a rapidly escalating emergency situation, which will soon hit all of Maryland and our nation's capital. In just a few minutes, I will once again be leading America's governors on a teleconference with the President, the Vice President, and some of our top federal leaders. Later today, we will also convene another call with our partners in the region, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam and Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. 2 weeks ago, the three of us sent a joint letter to the President requesting that the National Capital Region be designated as a priority location for a federally supported COVID-19 testing site. The Washington region is where national leaders are actually fighting this battle for the nation. And this region is about to be hit with the virus in the same way that some other major metropolitan areas have been. We are home to more than 404,000 federal workers in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. The NIH and FDA are headquartered in Maryland, and these agencies are on the front lines of the battle against the coronavirus. Maryland is also home to institutions that are critical to the security of our nation, including the NSA and the U.S. Cyber Command. Last week, 4 employees at Fort Meade tested positive for COVID-19. Federal workers at these institutions and all agencies of the federal government are and will continue to be getting sick. And a major outbreak among our critical federal workforce could be catastrophic, crippling the national response. This region also represents the 3rd largest economy in the nation. The health of the National Capital Region, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia, needs to be an urgent priority focus for our national leaders. It is critical for the nation's health response, for our national security, for our economy, and for the continuity of our government. On behalf of the nation's governors, we will continue to push for more progress on ramping up production and delivery of PPE, test kits, masks, ventilators, and other necessary equipment, and for more federal resources directly to the states that are on the front lines of this crisis. I want to thank our federal partners for answering our calls to action by dedicating some stimulus resources to the states and for committing to more state funding in the next round of stimulus. Also, for agreeing to our request to extend the deadlines for the census and the implementation of the Real ID, for implementing the Defense Production Act, for granting our request for major disaster declarations, including for us here in Maryland, and for agreeing to invoke Title 32 for the National Guard's relief missions. We're also grateful to the President and the Congress for coming together in a bipartisan way to deliver the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, which includes roughly $2.3 billion in federal assistance directly for the state of Maryland, including $810 million from the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund, $284 million for SNAP benefits, $220 million for Maryland local school districts, $158 million for local nutrition programs, $63 million for child care in Maryland, and $54 million for the Community Development Block Grant Program. The CARES Act also includes much-needed support for small businesses and extended benefits for the unemployed. All of the federal assistance is critically needed, and these efforts are appreciated. However, our state is not simply relying on or waiting for action from the federal government. We're very fortunate that Maryland has some of the top health research facilities in the world. I remain confident in our ability to be a leader in developing treatments and perhaps even a vaccine for COVID-19. Last week, the state committed funding to a joint partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies and Johns Hopkins to fund groundbreaking research into the potential therapeutic uses of COVID-19 convalescent plasma, which has the potential to save thousands of lives. Today, in coordination with the Maryland Department of Health, the Maryland Department of Transportation, State Highway Administration, the Maryland State Police, Maryland National Guard, and local partners have begun drive-through testing for COVID-19 at 3 motor vehicle emissions inspection stations in Glen Burnie, Waldorf, and Bel Air. In addition, today a Prince George's County COVID-19 screening and testing site has opened at FedEx Field in partnership with the University of Maryland Medical System, the Maryland National Guard, Maryland State Police, and Prince George's County Police. Residents can call Prince George's County Health Department at 301-883-6627 for more information. There is no charge at any of these COVID-19 assessment, screening, and testing sites. However, I want to stress that the testing allotment in Maryland and across America is still limited, and testing at these sites is strictly limited to those with a referral from their healthcare provider or doctor and who have an appointment to be tested. I also want to provide an update on our hospital surge efforts. On Saturday, FEMA delivered 250 bed packages to the Baltimore Convention Center Field Hospital, and the Maryland National Guard immediately began setting up the site. The state has assisted the University of Maryland Medical System in starting construction for the reopening of the 130-bed Laurel Hospital and is currently contracting for staff and equipment for that hospital site. We have ordered 500 additional new bed packages for on-site surge expansion at our hospitals, with an option for another 500 beds, which will be deployed to sites based on need at any coronavirus hotspots. We have also ordered 100 advanced medical tents to provide additional 1,000-bed field hospital capacity for on-site surge expansion at the hospitals and convention centers. They will be deployed to hospital sites at coronavirus hotspots based on need. We are also coordinating with the D.C. government to ensure that regional surge capacity is addressed, and engaging MedStar, which operates facilities in both D.C. and Maryland, and Kaiser Permanente, which operates in the Capital Region. Kaiser is planning to surge another 500 beds throughout the region, including an increase of 218 beds at their Maryland facilities. A week ago, we launched a $175 million comprehensive business relief program here in Maryland that brought together resources from 2 key state agencies, the Maryland Department of Commerce and the Maryland Department of Labor, to help hard-pressed Marylanders and small businesses get through this difficult period. We introduced the COVID-19 Layoff Aversion Fund to provide an additional $7 million to assist small businesses in the retainment of their employees. The Maryland Department of Labor has already received more than 1,500 applications, and today I have authorized an additional $2 million to bring this fund immediately up to $9 million. $8.8 million has already been provided to over 400 small businesses across the state, which has helped more than 8,000 Marylanders who work for small businesses keep their jobs in 20 out of 24 jurisdictions across Maryland. A week ago, we also established a $50 million Maryland Small Business COVID-19 Relief Grant Fund to provide direct, immediate grants to businesses that have lost revenue because of the coronavirus, along with a $75 million Maryland Small Business COVID-19 Fund to provide working capital to businesses and nonprofits with fewer than 50 employees that have lost revenue due to the pandemic. Our Commerce Department has already received more than 5,300 applications for this new relief fund and more than 11,000 applications for the new grant fund. Information on all of these Maryland assistance programs is available at businessexpress.maryland.gov Over the past few weeks, we took steps to direct insurers to waive all cost sharing for COVID-19 testing and to open up a special enrollment period of the Maryland Health Exchange and expanding the use of telehealth. Today, I am also enacting another executive order which temporarily suspends any requirements that families would have to pay premiums into the Maryland Children's Health Program so that families will not lose any coverage during the COVID-19 outbreak. Marylanders need to know that, unfortunately, we are only at the beginning of this crisis, and it is going to get considerably worse before it gets better. And I realize that this is incredibly difficult on everyone in our state. But I want people to know that we have been through difficult challenges before, and that we are going to get through this together. I also want to take just a moment to thank our doctors, nurses, all of our healthcare providers and first responders, along with our citizen soldiers of the National Guard. They are on the front lines every single day, putting their own health at risk in order to keep others safe. And they are true heroes. And there are also other heroes that you don't always hear about, like, for example, the 12 school systems across Maryland that have donated all of their medical supplies to their local emergency operations centers and health departments. Allegheny schools offered 8,000 surgical masks. Cecil County Public Schools donated 265 medical gowns, 1,200 surgical masks, 8,000 pairs of gloves, 150 oxygen tube packs, and 6,000 alcohol prep pads. The Howard County Public Schools donated 5,800 surgical masks and 6,000 pairs of surgical gloves, and Wycomico County Public Schools donated 100 N95 masks and 120 Tyvek suits. There are just literally hundreds of wonderful stories of small businesses, nonprofits, churches, volunteer groups, and individuals that are doing truly incredible things. And the fact is that each and every one of us has a chance right now to do something to help our neighbors. Every single Marylander can be a hero just by staying home and by practicing social distancing. This will not only keep you and your family safe, but it could also save the lives of thousands of others.
We've been listening to Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, who just issued a stay-at-home order that will go into effect 8 p.m. today, saying no longer is he going to simply ask people to stay home, but he is going to mandate it. And if people violate that, they could be fined and legally prosecuted. He also gave out details about a lending program to try to help keep the small businesses afloat as an effort to try to stave off some of the spreading coronavirus. Widens talking about some of the research that's involved in order to get new medications, as well as efforts to try to reduce, again, the spread, which is spreading quickly. Nathan Hager in Washington, D.C. there. Nathan, what stood out to you, and can you give us a sense of what the most important notes were there?
Well, the bottom line, as you mentioned, Lisa, is that what was a suggestion in the past is now an executive order from the governor of Maryland issuing a stay-at-home directive saying it will take effect at 8 p.m. Wall Street time tonight, that every resident of Maryland will get a text message telling them that unless they need to get out of their house for an essential job or for basic errands like food, getting necessary medications, or getting to a medical appointment that's needed, they are being told to stay at home. And as you mentioned, any knowing violation would be a misdemeanor, subject to up to a year in prison or a $5,000 fine, or both. Hogan also reiterated a call that he's been putting out for the last several days for the greater Washington region to be designated a priority testing site for COVID-19. He notes that a lot of people who are working on the front lines, not just from getting people treated, but doing the necessary testing and research into this virus, are headquartered in the state of Maryland, including the National Institutes of Health and Johns Hopkins University, which has been tracking the global spread of this pandemic. He says we are only at the beginning of this crisis, and bottom line, stay at home if you live in Maryland. Lisa.
Nathan, thank you so much. That was just really, it is interesting to see what's going on. And in the markets, it would be interesting to see at what point people start to price in the benefit, at least, of some of these programs. As you can hear in the background, you can hear the sirens near my place. There is a hospital, and you can just hear sirens all day long. Right now, we are, though, looking at an extended rally in equities, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. S&P's up about 2%. That's 50 points. Dow Jones Industrial's up 1.6%, 350 points there. That puts the Dow at just under 22,000, and NASDAQ is up about 2.5%. Let's bring in Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson, see where the action is with the small and mid-cap stocks. Dave?
Well, they're not keeping up with the larger companies, that's for sure. The Russell 2000 index only higher by 0.8%, while the S&P 500 is up 2%. That said, the Russell's biggest gain, at least one of them, belongs to Owens & Minor, whose ticker is OMI. The medical product distributor has risen about 34.5% after reaffirming this year's earnings forecast late Friday. And you're seeing gains among oil tanker owners as falling crude prices lead to higher rates for what's called floating storage. Nordic American Tankers, ticker NAT, is up about 17.5%. TK, ticker TK, that's two letters there, up about 13%. And DHT Holdings, ticker DHT, also up about 13%. The Russell's steepest drop belongs to California Resources, ticker CRC. The oil producer is down 28% to just 95 cents a share. The stock's tumbling for a second day after people with knowledge of the matter said the company is considering bankruptcy. And Tegna, ticker TGNA, has lost 23%. A person with knowledge of the matter said buyout firm Apollo Global ended its pursuit of the television station owner.
Thank you so much, Dave Wilson, Bloomberg Stocks editor, for joining us with that. We want to go back to our conversation with Greg Hahn, Chief Investment Officer for Winthrop Capital Management, on credit. We've been talking a lot about the potential pitfalls in credit as well as the opportunities as dislocations start to get bridged with Fed stimulus. Greg, where we left off, you were talking about the opportunities within credit, and you were talking about commercial mortgage debt in particular as being perhaps sold off disproportionately. What are your baked-in assumptions, Greg? I'd love your sense as you extrapolate out of how deep and long the recession will be and whether that even matters in terms of where things are being valued and the opportunity therein.
Yeah, so for us to make sense of this, we have to separate what's going on in the economy and what's going on in the financial system with what's going on in the capital markets. So we put those into, it all gets smushed together. But if we focus on the capital markets piece of it, just specifically to your question, we think the REIT sector right now is going to be challenged, but the way that it flows through in the commercial mortgage loan space, we expect businesses to miss their April 1st. We're going to see, a decline in April 1st rent payments. We're going to see a decline in May 1st rent payments. And then we'll start to see some improvement after that as businesses just get back to up and running. And that particularly is in that strip mall space where you see restaurants, nail salons, barbershops, that kind of service stuff that's effectively shut down for this period of time.
So, Greg, what kind of economic assumption are you guys kind of working on? We had a bunch of Wall Street investment banks over the last week coming out with GDP forecasts quarterly for 2020, and most had, I would characterize as kind of a V type of recovery with a sharp contraction in Q2, but then a rebound in Qs 3 and 4. Is that what you're modeling in?
Yeah, so I can't put numbers to it, but if we look at shapes of letters, we're not looking at a V-shaped recovery right now. This one's going to be shorter than the financial crisis of 2008, but this is going to be extended. This is going to go on for 2 quarters.
Greg, I want to talk more about speculative grade credit in general, and you're talking about the opportunities in higher rated junk bonds. I'm just wondering about investment grade downgrades, the fallen angel kind of syndrome. We've seen an escalating number of downgrades. I'm just wondering at what point that's going to cause forced selling that bleeds out into the top tier of high yield. How worried are you about that?
Well, it absolutely will. We saw Ford get downgraded last week. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. We're going to see it. This happened in the late 1990s, early 2000s, where we saw Georgia Pacific, Ford, GM, a number of investment grade companies get downgraded with low interest rate and tight credit spreads. It's not going to have a fundamental impact on the company. It's not going to increase their borrowing costs as long as they can access the markets. It's going to have a bigger effect in the capital markets for those of us who navigate where we want to allocate dollars. So a large amount of credit coming from investment grade into high yield. We're going to have to digest that into the high yield space. Yes, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, what's your sense of the financial system, the health of the financial system, maybe say now versus 2008, 2009?
Right. So in 2008, 2009, we were dealing with a growth in the subprime loan space that worked its way into structured product, different types of product. From our view, we don't have those kinds of excesses in the residential space. We thought the commercial mortgage loan space was a little bit extended. And so there's been a lot of development over the last 8 years. But the financial system is significantly stronger than it was 12 years ago, because we're talking about banks now that have capital levels in excess of 8%. And the context for that is back in the financial crisis, I think the banking sector was closer to 4%. So I think the banks have enough of a shock absorber to absorb this much better than they had. And part of this is the Fed has responded so quickly to put programs in place to help support commercial paper and repurchase agreements and really to support the financial system. So it's got the shock absorbers it needs to help absorb this crisis.
So one thing I've been struggling with, just taking a step back, there's a theory out there anyway that there's a big shift going on that's getting accelerated by the coronavirus to a digital economy. You're seeing Slack, you're seeing Zoom all surge, you're seeing sort of anything having to do with online delivery do well. And a lot of the high yield market is tied to the old economy and to industrial companies that are struggling arguably the most. What do you say to people who just argue that you have all these over leveraged companies that are going to not be able to grow into their capital structures, that's going to lead to a whole host of defaults with bigger loan losses on them, loan loss recoveries, than during the 2008 crisis? I keep hearing more about that. Is that a real worry?
Yeah, the difference between the new economy and the old economy, if there are assets tied to those businesses, there's value. In the new economy, where you've got technology-based businesses, there's just from a credit standpoint, there's fewer assets. So that your asset is actually your client base. It's not necessarily your website, the technology to support it. But it's a valid point. I mean, we've got this whole shift. Every industry is going through some tectonic shift right now. And I always joke we never got a memo when the typewriter left the office back in 1987 or whenever it left. It's like it just starts to happen, and then the typewriter repair shop goes out. So some of this is going to have an impact on literally how we do business.
Greg Hahn, thank you so much for joining us and hanging on there. Greg Hahn, Chief Investment Officer for Winthrop Capital Management, giving us his thoughts on the market. Right now, let's go for a Bloomberg Business Flash with Greg Jarrett. Greg, what do you have for us?
Well, Paul, we're getting another leg up, it appears, as stocks go up. Investors are seeing glimmers of optimism in healthcare efforts to deliver rapid virus testing, and the dollar is up. We look at those numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. S&P 500 is up 2.25%, up 56. The Dow's up nearly 2%, up 428. The Nasdaq is up 2.6%, up 195. The 10-year is currently up 14.30 seconds with a yield of 0.63%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up down 5.5% at $20.30 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.6% at $16.4460 an ounce. The dollar yen 108.12. The euro's $1.10.28, and the British pound $1.24.15. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues with Lisa and Paul.
Thank you so much, Greg Jarrett. There's a question of how quickly some of the pharmaceutical companies can move to try to create some sort of remedy or vaccine for the coronavirus. A couple of news items on that front. You've got Abbott Laboratories, their shares surging after saying that they have a 5-minute coronavirus test that's getting ready to go out there. And then, of course, Johnson & Johnson coming out and talking about preliminary testing of a potential vaccine. Max Neeson, Bloomberg Opinion columnist, joining us now to talk about the latest and the greatest. How close, Max, are we to some sort of medical resolution here, whether it's Abbott, whether it's Johnson & Johnson, or whether it's some studies out of Italy having to do with drug combinations that are out there, also something about tuberculosis as vaccine or something? Where are we on this?
Where we are depends on what specific category you're asking about. As for news about some existing drugs, that malaria combo you keep hearing about, or Gilead's remdesivir, that will get data trickling in over the next few weeks and months. There's some question about how effective those will be. So you also look forward to kind of these novel treatments and vaccines. Those are a few months further out and, come with risks of their own. I know you keep hearing me and other people say that the 12 to 18 month timeline, but that's the timeline if it works and if it's safe. And, there's never any guarantee of that in drug development, let alone when you have these accelerated timelines. So all we can do is hope and wait for now.
So, Max, how about just on the testing front? Where are we there? Because that seems, a key area where we can make some headway.
Yeah, so, you mentioned the Abbott 5-minute test. That's really crucial in a number of different ways. First, a boosting of any boost of capacity is important, and this runs on a platform that's already widely used in urgent care centers and other places to test for strep and flu. So it kind of instantly creates potential capacity in more parts of the country. And again, another crucial element, it's capacity that's outside of hospitals. So people don't have to line up close together and add to the burdens of already, really busy staff. So this is something that I think is going to help a lot as it rolls out in the next few weeks. So that is definitely a positive development.
Just taking a step back, I'm trying to figure out where we are in understanding the coronavirus. I was really struck by Tom Frieden, the former health commissioner of New York City and the head of CDC, the former head of the CDC. He came out with a column in Project Syndicate recently where he was saying all of the things we don't know about this virus. They're really basic. They're things like we don't know how contagious kids who are non-symptomatic are. We don't have a sense of, in general, if somebody is non-symptomatic, how transmissible it is. Where are we in just understanding the transmission of the disease?
Unfortunately, quite early. You see papers by the dozen come out every week as people try to catch up. And, I'll add a few questions to that. We
Please.
don't know the extent of the acquired immunity that people get if they're infected. Are you safe from reinfection and for how long? Does it matter if you were asymptomatic or symptomatic for that acquired immunity? All sorts of things that are going to be incredibly relevant for how rapidly and to what extent we can reopen the economy once we actually start to see a declining case count, which again is some weeks away. So it's gonna take a lot of study by very dedicated scientists. And as we learn more, I'll be here to try and let everyone know.
Max, just on the mortality rate in the U.S., is it materially higher than maybe other countries, or is it materially different?
The mortality rate question is one that, it's one of those things that we just don't know enough about because every country, does different counts, in terms of, what counts as a mortality related to the virus. Is it just people that die in a hospital on a ventilator specifically because of this virus? Does it count people that also have, comorbidity, someone who also has cancer? So again, that's a question that to be able to answer well, we're going to need so much more data. So I wish I had a firmer answer, but the best thing that everyone can do is stay home at the moment and prevent transmission, which will keep the death rate as low as possible.
Max Neeson, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We're going to be chatting with you a lot going forward, as we have over the last several weeks. Max Neeson is a Bloomberg Opinion biotech, pharma, and healthcare columnist, giving the latest on what we know and what we don't know. And there's, at least as Max was suggesting, there's a lot that we don't know.
Yeah, I've just been struck by how basic the questions really are. Like, how do you catch the disease? And this is actually really important when I look around and I go to the store, which I probably shouldn't, but you have to buy food, and you go there and people have these plastic masks over their faces that are like, what you would wear if you are welding something, one of those things, or garbage bags. You're just sort of wondering, at what point is this ineffective, or at what point are we just driving ourselves into a frenzy?
I know. Very challenging times. Looking at the markets, a little bit of a rebound here today, up about 2.3% on the S&P, Dow up 2%. That's 435 points. We'll have more coming for you coming up on Bloomberg Markets. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. The S&P 500 climbing for a fourth time in 5 days, even after a weekend filled with negative coronavirus pandemic news. Investors are hopeful as Abbott Laboratories announced a 5-minute coronavirus test. This is the week when we'll really begin to see the economic impact of the pandemic. Businesses have been deciding how many employees they can afford to keep. The government jobs report comes out on Friday. Lawmakers in Washington are making it easier for Americans struggling with the fallout from the coronavirus to draw on the trillions of dollars in their 401ks and other retirement accounts. For a limited time, Americans will be able to withdraw money from tax-deferred accounts without penalties. And Visa has told its global roster of Olympic and Paralympic hopefuls their sponsorships will be extended into 2021 after the Tokyo Games were postponed. It's the first clear commitment by a major sponsor to extend such sponsorship support. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, it's Olivia Munn with my shelter pets, Frankie and Chance. Say hi, guys. When I adopted them, I discovered that they both have incredible personalities. Chance's sole purpose in life is to love and to be loved. Frankie is a little bit of a scoundrel and always entertaining. They're a little bit of a lot of things, but they're all pure love. Adopt pure love at theshelterpetproject.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, the Humane Society of the United States, and Maddie's Fund.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscribe.
We need to tackle coronavirus together. You can help by not travelling unless it is absolutely essential. With limited staff, TfL is supporting journeys for critical workers only, especially the NHS and emergency services. No one else should be travelling. If you must travel, try to avoid the busy times, particularly the early morning. We have already seen fewer people using our services. Thank you for doing your bit. Stay at home. Do not travel. Save lives.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Want to know a great way to discover the latest and greatest sports audio on TuneIn? It's easy. Just make sure push notifications are enabled on your phone to receive recommendations of sports talk radio and podcasts, along with important breaking news updates.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with our Washington correspondent about the many political battles being waged in the Capitol over how to deal with the new coronavirus.
You couldn't imagine a president personalizing a crisis with a virus, but somehow that's where we are.
Susan Glasser. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
Cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically. Yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President and Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at seic.com/seize change.
To protect her home and family in a disaster, Karen was willing to wade through water, mud, and insurance paperwork.
Yeah, I can do this.
You go, Karen! By simply understanding and updating what her insurance covers and doesn't cover now, she'll be better prepared no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Sometimes the simplest method is the best one.
I think even I could figure it out today.
Balance of Power with David Weston.
You had a high estimate. It beat your high estimate.
Weekdays at noon Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up on Bloomberg Markets, we'll take a look at General Motors' latest business, which is making ventilators. Plus, we'll take a look at the commercial real estate market. We've been talking a lot about the pain there. I'll speak to one investor about where the potential opportunities may be. Right now, let's get the numbers. Greg Jarrett has that for us with the Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
I dare say it looks like a bit of a rally, Lisa, as the S&P climbs for the fourth time in 5 days, even after a weekend full of negative pandemic news, including the president's abrupt order to extend recommendations aimed at inhibiting the spread. We look at the numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500 is currently up 2.5%, up 64. The Dow's up 2.4%, up 525. The Nasdaq's up 2.9%, up 216. The 10-year is currently up 14.30 seconds with a yield of 0.63%. West Texas Intermediate crude is down 4.8% now at $20.46 a barrel. COMEX gold's down 0.7% to $16.4220 per ounce. The dollar yen, 108.02. The euro, $1.1039. The British pound, $1.2399. You've been hearing about the unemployment numbers. Now there may be more added to that. Macy's says it will furlough the majority of its workforce and bring headcount to the absolute minimum as it tries to offset losses. Right now, Macy's is down 3.3%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues now with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
Greg, Craig Jarrett, thank you so much. Well, there's been a lot of back and forth between President Trump and General Motors about ventilators. Are they making them? Are they charging too much? Let's get the latest with David Welch, Bloomberg Detroit Bureau Chief. So, David, give us the latest on what's going on with General Motors and pivoting into the manufacturing of ventilators.
Yeah, so they've actually started tearing down the original machine at Ventec, which is GM's partner. They're tearing that machine down at an auto parts plant in Kokomo and rebuilding it and really kind of perfecting I call it an assembly line, but it's really a room full of people assembling these things. The factory that will make these things. So they're getting to the final throes of really setting up a whole process to make thousands of ventilators. And this is important because Ventec, which makes this critical care ventilator that can be used for COVID-19 patients, they were used to making 150, maybe in a good month, 250 units. And working with GM, they're going to try to get to 10,000 a month. So this is a huge leap for a company that makes something that, while important, was not heretofore in such great demand.
There was some controversy, David, over General Motors and how much they were charging for some of these ventilators. President Trump singling them out and talking about this. Where are we on that?
So Trump kind of did a complete about face in his press briefing yesterday and said GM is doing a fantastic job. But the initial controversy was Trump just came out Friday and said they weren't moving fast enough. They were gouging. To be blunt, these are both kind of dodgy claims. First of all, you have Ford and General Electric are trying to make these, and they were saying they won't be ready until June, and GM is looking to start production in mid-April. So they're ahead of every other venture out there that at least has been discussed publicly. GM is actually not really even negotiating this. Ventec negotiates the terms of the deal. GM is a contract manufacturer that gets paid by Ventec. And GM is doing the work at cost, and Ventec is charging, at least what they told me, the same $18,000 a unit that they've been charging all along. What may not be totally appreciated here is, in Ventec's unit, is one of the cheaper critical care units out there. It's actually a 5-in-1 unit. It handles 4 other respiratory therapies that you need for these patients, when the other ventilators are just that are on the market are just ventilators, and you have to buy the other 4 pieces of equipment separately. So there's some talk that maybe that wasn't totally appreciated by the president when he started complaining about price, but he seems to be happy with everything now because 2 days after his rant, he kind of backpedaled.
So, David, you mentioned mid-April. Give us a sense of kind of the ramp up here in terms of timing, number of units of production. What's the best guess at this point?
Look, I think when they start producing in mid-April, it's going to be pretty small numbers. Right now, GM has 300 people working in that plant, and they need to, over time, get up to 1,000. So they're looking for volunteers who've been laid off at their current plant in Kokomo, Indiana. They're looking for volunteers from a metal stamping plant in nearby Marion, Indiana, and they're going to have to do some new hires. They're still kind of finishing the process that they'll use to make these. And keep in mind, when engines or cars are assembled, they go along a rolling assembly line and work this sort of, they do certain tasks with robotic arms as the car goes by. Making ventilators is a lot more like making watches than assembling cars. You have a lot of people sitting at tables with small tools, looking through a lens, and screwing small electronic components together. That's why GM chose this plant. It's an electronic components plant.
Yeah.
That's what it did before. But it's still a different process. GM has never done it before. Their part suppliers, these are all automotive part suppliers that are doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
So it's new parts for them, and they're going to have to validate this and make sure it all works. So when this starts in mid-April, you're going to see pretty small amounts, and maybe by the end of April, you'll be up to hundreds, or if they're really good, over 1,000 a month. So
yeah, well, so we're not going to see.
We're
not going to see huge numbers there. The other place we're not going to see huge numbers is just the auto manufacturing in general. How low are auto sales going to be? What are some of the predictions at this point?
So we're probably looking at a March that was pretty well decimated by this. Everybody was saying the first week was pretty good, and then all the shutdowns started hitting. People were avoiding dealerships. There were towns and states basically keeping people inside, except for essential industries and so forth. About all of that. So that's really hammered sales. So it's going to be a rough quarter when we see the numbers on Wednesday. And going into April, I would expect the same thing, because you're probably still going to have a lot of people staying home, even if they're allowed to go out in their states, just to avoid contact with others.
David Welch, thank you so much for being with us, and all the best to you and your family. David Welch, Bloomberg Detroit Bureau Chief, talking about perhaps the new business the automakers are getting into, the ventilator making. I will say, Paul, I find it incredibly endearing as everybody works from home and everyone's trying to finagle these new situations, that you kind of hear dishes clanking in the background and people making breakfast, and everyone seems to be undoing their silverware containers from the dishwashers. That's what I'm picturing in my head. But frankly, it's a very human moment, and everybody is trying to adjust in whatever way, whether it's their kids being homeschooled or whether they're working on the couch in the living room while their significant other works in the bedroom. What a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of new work from home arrangements. It'll be interesting to see how people adapt, on the other side of this. We see, a growing trend of people just in different lines of business working from home.
I built a desk this weekend. I built a desk that I needed. I was really proud of myself. The small victories of life. Right now we're looking at a rally that is extending. We're seeing right now the Nasdaq up 2.6%, the S&P up 2.2%, and the Dow up 2%. As to why, well, we'll keep trying to find an answer. Right now, let's head down to Nathan Hager for world and national headlines in Washington, D.C. Nathan.
Yeah, I might have to move my home studio to a window view with President Trump now bracing Americans for a longer outbreak from the coronavirus than he'd hoped for just a few days ago. The president is extending social distancing measures for another month, saying he hopes Easter is when the infection rate will start to go down. In a Fox News interview, the president said his health experts are warning at least 100,000 Americans could die in this pandemic.
A little short of June, maybe June 1st. We think it's a terrible thing to say, but we think the death will be at a very low number. It'll be brought down to a very low number from right now, from where it's getting to reach its peak.
New York remains the nation's hotspot, but the Washington, D.C. region has seen its number of infections quadruple in recent days. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan just announced that he's signed a stay-at-home order for his residents. Dr. Anthony Fauci at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases tells ABC's Good Morning America smaller cities that haven't seen many COVID-19 cases yet are at risk for New York-style outbreaks.
Detroit is starting to show some signs that they're going to take off. L.A. we worry about, even though they had an early start, they calmed down a little. It looks like that they may have the opportunity and the misfortune of spiking up.
Meantime, Russia's Interfax news agency reports President Trump has spoken with Russian leader Vladimir Putin about closer coronavirus cooperation. Earlier, President Trump had said he'd talk with the Russian leader about plummeting oil prices. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she'll hold a news conference this afternoon about a fourth round of stimulus. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong. Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, Visit HUD.gov/fair housing. That's HUD.gov/fair housing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Are you interested in a challenge?
We need to tackle coronavirus together. You can help by not travelling unless it is absolutely essential. With limited staff, TfL is supporting journeys for critical workers only, especially the NHS and emergency services. No one else should be travelling. If you must travel, try to avoid the busy times, particularly the early morning. We have already seen fewer people using our services. Thank you for doing your bit. Stay at home. Do not travel. Save lives.
Heroes. They're the ones we turn to in our darkest hour. Like when you blow a fuse and the lights go off. Whether it's electrics to heating, plumbing to plastering. At Local Heroes, every job completed by an expert tradesperson comes with a 12-month British Gas guarantee when you pay online. So, if it needs fixing, there's a local hero for that. To get a quote, search Local Heroes. Terms and conditions apply.
This week at Tesco, large Easter eggs are 3 for £8. And we've got a large choice too on all your favourite brands, including Terry's Chocolate Orange, Cadbury's and Maltesers. At 3 for £8, why shell out more? Tesco. Every little helps. Available in the majority of larger stores and online. Delivery charges may apply until 13th of April.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Want to know a great way to discover the latest and greatest sports audio on TuneIn? It's easy. Just make sure push notifications are enabled on your phone to receive recommendations of sports talk radio and podcasts, along with important breaking news updates.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with our Washington correspondent about the many political battles being waged in the Capitol over how to deal with the new coronavirus.
You couldn't imagine a president personalizing a crisis with a virus, but somehow that's where we are.
Susan Glasser. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
In just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Vattel Shah is Senior Project Engineer at Mott MacDonald, a global engineering consultancy with more than 16,000 employees. He earned his PhD at New Jersey Institute of Technology, and as an adjunct professor, is helping NJIT students explore emerging technologies.
My focus is renewable markets, emerging technologies, the idea of floating cities. What are we doing to develop that? What will happen to the city on the water? Well, you're going to have waves hitting it. You're going to have solar. How are you going to develop plants? How are you going to develop vegetation and farming? That sort of thought process happens at NJIT. We actually plan out what will the city look like. How do we develop that? So in 10 years, we're actually ready to take on those challenges when we have our first development in the water. NJIT also has been doing a lot of work in self-healing materials, so taking the polymers and the new material that we have in our material sciences departments and putting them into things like concrete, things like steel, reinforcing our soil.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks rally. Investors are seeing some optimism for healthcare efforts to deliver rapid virus testing, and the dollar is up. We look at the numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P 500 is up 2.3%, up 59. The Dow is up 2%, up 425, and the NASDAQ is up 2.7%, up 200. The 10-year is up 9/32 with a yield of 0.64%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 5.7% at $20.28 a barrel, while COMEX gold is down 0.7% at $16.4330 an ounce. The dollar yen stands at 108.06. The euro is $1.1029, and the British pound $1.2396. As U.S. junk bonds start to find a floor after the biggest loss since 2008, investors, including Goldman Sachs and Invesco, are seeing reasons to buy. They cite tremendous opportunity. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues now with Lisa and Paul.
Thank you so much, Greg Jarrett. Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City right now is making some comments. The USNS Comfort, that ship that has sailed in with additional hospital resources for sick New Yorkers. Let's take a listen to what he has to say.
To make it possible for this ship to dock, they did it in 8 days. And that means help has arrived quicker, and we're going to be able to do the life-saving work right now. I want to also thank from the military, one of the leaders who did the work to make this moment possible, Marine Corps Colonel Brian Duplessis, who's with us. Thank you, Colonel. And from my team, Deputy Mayor Raul Perea Hense for Health and Human Services, and Commissioner James Hendon, Department of Veterans Services. Colonel James Hendon, thank you. So, with this ship comes an extraordinary complement of talented individuals in service to our nation, 1,200 medical staff and sailors here to help us all. 750 beds will be put into play immediately to relieve the pressure on our hospital system. Let me be clear that this is such a crucial part of the plan we are putting in place, but I want you to understand the sheer magnitude of the plan. We need to triple our hospital bed capacity in New York City by May. The number of beds we had at the beginning of March have to triple by May. It is a daunting task, but we got a big boost. The arrival of the Comfort. This is like adding a whole nother hospital to New York City. It's like, think of all the big hospitals in New York City, Bellevue and all the other famous hospitals we think of. It's like another one of them just floated right up to help us right now. And I hope New Yorkers know that this is something we've been fighting for, and we're going to be fighting for a lot more help. Because this is just the beginning. My job is always to tell you the truth, and I'll tell you when we get the help we need, and I'll tell you when we need more help. I'll tell you when we're getting into the thick of the battle, and I'll tell you when we're coming out of the battle. Right now, the toughest weeks are still ahead. But we are grateful. We are grateful for every doctor, for every nurse, for every ventilator, for the supplies, for the beds, for everything that's come from the Comfort and everything that has come from all over the country. And I have to tell you, it's the federal government, it's the state government, of course, but it's also the companies that have come forward offering help. People we've never met, individuals who've come forward with supplies, healthcare workers who have volunteered. It's the United Nations, which came up with 250,000 surgical masks and got them to us right away. We're seeing amazing offers of help, and people are moving fast to get help to New York City, and we appreciate it. We need it. So let's look forward. Let's pray. There's going to be a lot more days like this when people can see our nation stand by us. And then I affirm to you, when the battle is done here, New York City will stand firm for the rest of our nation. New York City will be the first to donate to the rest of our nation. We will send the ventilators, the supplies. We will ask our doctors and nurses to go to the front wherever it is in this nation, because our country was there for us, and we will be there for our country. A few words in Spanish.
We've been listening to New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio speaking aboard the USNS Comfort, the ship that has sailed into New York Harbor to provide what he called basically an additional hospital as the city tries to deal with a growing number of cases. In the meantime, we continue to dig into the economic ramifications of some of the closures, and we've seen a number of retailers furlough or lay off whole hosts of workers. The latest being Macy's, today saying that it was going to close after closing all of its stores on March 18th. Now it's going to furlough most of its 130,000 workers. This has led to a lot of questions about commercial real estate values, rent payments, and the like. Joining us to say, I'm really pleased to say, is Hassam Noji. He's president and chief executive officer of a major commercial real estate firm, Marcus & Millichap, based in Calabasas, California. And Hassam, I'd love to get your take, first of all, given the Macy's news, given the fact that we've seen retailers across the board just close down stores en masse. Will this have a permanent effect on commercial real estate values that have not even yet been priced in?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the program. First of all, this is unlike anything we've all experienced, at the risk of stating the obvious, in that it's really a health crisis, and most of our clients and everybody participating in our industry is first and foremost concerned about the health of their employees and their families. So it's very difficult to separate the emotional component of that with the business component at this minute, which is unusual from anything we've seen in the past. But to answer to your question, what's happening around us right now is hastening the trend that was already playing out for retail. As you know, e-commerce has really profoundly changed brick and mortar retailing, and a lot of the obsolete older shopping centers and a lot of shopping centers that relied on department stores have been hurt badly by what was already happening. This is just speeding that up. I think there's going to be more short-term pain because of it. Clearly, there's no way around that. But I also want to point out the rebirth of retail, where we've seen so many examples of renovations, repositioning, and re-tenanting of retail that has been widely successful and has become a great investment vehicle. And there are components of retail, like the stable grocery-anchored type of retail that is, of course, doing very well right now, but was doing well even before the health crisis began. And fast food restaurant, drugstore, single-tenant retail, where you have one tenant on a long-term lease and is much less risky. Those are doing very well and in great demand by investors.
Hassam, taking a look at the $2 trillion fiscal stimulus package, what was in there for real estate from your perspective?
I think the most important part of the package is the fact that there's $350 billion allocated for small business forgivable loans and $500 billion for large companies. As much help as can be delivered to companies to stay afloat during the worst of this health crisis in order to limit employee layoffs is the most important component, because that has to do with tenants, and tenants have to do with the occupancies of commercial real estate. In addition to that, the way that the Fed has stepped in at an unprecedented speed and scale, very different from 2008, 2009, when we absorbed, the lack of a playbook, taking months to come up with solutions, has now resulted in their ability to be much more nimble and much more bold in the way that come in to basically backstop liquidity and assure the functioning of the credit markets. That's a profound help for not just commercial real estate, but all businesses. And I think it really lays the groundwork for a rapid recovery, just as much as this is going to be a very deep, painful downturn and hopefully a short-term one. The recovery, because of the action that's being taken, should therefore be just as profound.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local...
3 is a magic number. 300 schemes to help bugs and bees, supporting environmental needs. 8,000 grants for local sports, and performing arts get our support. 7 millionaires every week. The nation's on a winning streak. 30 million pounds to good causes every week. Who'd have thought it? These are magic numbers.
Your numbers make amazing happen. The National Lottery.
Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
TuneIn makes it easy to be a part of the conversation. Just make sure push notifications are enabled to hear about breaking news and trending topics from around the sports world. You'll also get custom recommendations of podcasts and radio stations covering the sports and teams you care about.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, and welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. I want to start today with a quick check on the markets, and for that we go to Taylor Riggs. So it looks pretty good for equities at the moment, Taylor.
Yeah, David, very interesting that we came in overnight and futures were negative. We seem to have turned that around. So far, S&P 500 up about 2% or so. Crude, though, still heading a little bit lower. This is as there's still a lot of concerns, not only on the supply side, but the demand side as well. Briefly last night, dipping to a 19 handle on crude, so trying to recover just a little bit and hang on there to a 20.30 here on crude. Bloomberg Dollar Index still firmer. We had 4 days of weakening on the Bloomberg Dollar Index last week as we'd seen some of the funding pressures relieved, but the safe haven again turns around and further strengthens today. What that means, though, is the VIX still continues to head lower. David, a 59 handle on the VIX is something that certainly feels a little bit less panicky than an 80 or so that we've had in the last few weeks, though this is still pretty elevated, I would say, at a VIX at 60. I do want to quickly just talk about some of the individual stocks that were moving. As you can see, it is interesting. You have a lot of these stocks rising and falling despite some of the overall gains that we're seeing within the S&P 500. Carnival Cruise, of course, as we know, you've seen a lot of some of these cruise lines extend the ban on the travel limits that we've seen as the president overnight now saying that we're sort of extending this lockdown period, if you will, through April 30th. Boeing as well getting another hit after posting, 80% gains or so last week. Boeing is now saying, Barclays is saying that Boeing could, and Airbus combined, could see production cuts of 30 to 40%. So you're really seeing Boeing getting hit. Disney, though, one of the strong performers, at least today. Goldman is saying that Disney and Marriott are some of the few coronavirus picks that despite the shutdown, some of these stocks really should recover. So interesting to see Goldman coming out and saying that, you know what, Disney may be hanging in there after all, David.
Okay, thank you so much to Taylor Riggs. Various medical and health insurance companies across the country are doing what they can to help in this coronavirus. And the latest is Cigna, and it's gotten specific approval from the President of the United States, who really complimented them on what they've done. In part, what they've done is eliminate copay for the treatment of coronavirus. But they've done much more in addition. And here to explain to us is David Cordani. He is the president and CEO of Cigna. So, David, thank you so much for taking time with us. Explain to us your most recent announcement.
David, good to be with you today. So we took a step forward after clearing the way for individuals to cover their testing, clearing the way relative to telemedicine and 90-day pharmaceutical supplies. We took a step forward today and announced that we are stepping in on behalf of our customers to take care of their financial out-of-pocket costs as relates to COVID-19 treatment, whether that's a copay, co-insurance, or otherwise. We felt as though, given this unique time we find ourselves in the United States, that step was warranted to provide the peace of mind to the individuals we serve. So it's a meaningful step forward. There's 2 additional items we announced as well. We're transferring or redeploying several hundred of our nurses and doctors to go support telemedicine infrastructure with some of our partners as more individuals look to telemedicine to fulfill their needs. So we're expanding access from that standpoint. And then lastly, David, we're standing up with a partner of ours, an artificial intelligence partner of ours, an online free capability to go in and risk check your COVID-19 or health symptoms to help you determine whether or not you may be confronting the disease or not, and try to help to provide information to individuals before they may need to go pursue testing or otherwise. So some really important announcements, all putting our customers or patients front and center in the decision making.
So, Xavier, give us some sense, if you can, of the possible range of the copay part, the first part that you mentioned there. We hope that not many, a high percentage of your people actually get it, but potentially how many people could that affect?
We don't have an estimate in terms of individuals. Obviously, the rate and pace of that is going to be highly dictated over the course of the next month or so as it relates to the effectiveness of the U.S.'s policy around social distancing and the like from that standpoint. But we were clear, this covers our commercial risk population, our commercial exchange population, our Medicare Advantage population, our Medicaid population, and then also our global clients for those individuals who are consuming care in the United States. And then lastly, for corporate ASO clients, we're working with those clients to advise them on positioning they should take as we serve them on their behalf. So we do not have a patient estimate at this point in time.
David, you mentioned telemedicine, which is something that we're talking about a lot these days, both because hospitals are way overcrowded, but also there's some risk in just going to your doctor, given the need for social distancing. What are you seeing in terms of increases in telemedicine that warranted you sending these physicians, these clinicians, out to help?
Sure, David. So even before COVID-19, we as a company were stepping forward saying we wanted to expand what we call the front end of care. And bring more care and more services to individuals. So in three different ways. One is telemedicine, both medical as well as behavioral health services. Second is to attempt to re-envision what could take place in the home, in terms of expanding what could take place in the home. And then third is working with our physician partners to expand the services that could take place in a less invasive setting, more specifically in a physician's office as opposed to an outpatient facility or the like. So point is, we've been ramping toward an expansion of virtual care and in-home care in advance of COVID-19. Now, to your core of your question, individuals are more open to experiencing care virtually today than ever before because of COVID-19, and we're seeing the volumes ramp in quantums, multiples of what they were ramping at in advance for both medical health as well as behavioral health, and that's what led us to redeploy resources that we have, nurses and doctors, to partners like MD Live and others to expand that reach. And we think this will be a societal change that probably will continue to go forward long after COVID-19 because it's a convenient, safe, effective, evidence-based way to consume many aspects of care.
David, we're all focused, of course, on COVID-19 and the disease that is spreading across the country. But I know, because you and I have talked about it before, you're also concerned about what you call whole person health. Right now, there's a lot of strain being put on that because we all are in remote locations with our families or even alone. How are you addressing that issue?
Yeah, so David, I appreciate the whole person health. That is our orientation around trying to connect the mental health and physical health aspects. And just as a backdrop for your audience, we know today in the United States, as an example, if an individual has a chronic disease, of which about half of Americans confront at least one chronic disease, you're 7 times more likely to have clinical depression than if you don't have a chronic disease. But if that clinical depression goes untreated, you're more likely to have follow-on onset of additional medical or behavioral conditions from that standpoint. So we bring the behavioral health resources into our chronic or case management system from that standpoint. In the current environment, it's going to get strained even further because there's separation that is taking place, to your point, and we know that separation increases loneliness, and loneliness increases mental health challenges. So we're expanding and trying to press ourselves relative to, as we talked about, telemedicine for behavioral health, but also inbound interactions to our customers or patients from our nurses, from our behavioral health professionals, from our health coaches, to try to elevate and broaden the levels of engagement, especially during this unique time. So I think it presses the importance of engagement up even further, and it presses the importance of whole person health even further, and we need to be creative in terms of how we step up to it in this interim period of time.
David, Cigna is an integral part of the overall healthcare system in this country. Give us some sense of just how much stress and strain is being put on that system. Is it up to the task? What does it need?
Well, the U.S. healthcare system's quite sophisticated and multidimensional, and as an American, I feel fortunate to have access to that for myself and my family. No doubt it's under strain because it's imbalanced at this point in time. So when you take dimensions of the sophisticated surgical interventions we have around musculoskeletal or otherwise, many of those services are being deferred at this point in time because of the importance of the acute inpatient services. A concrete example, we and others in our industry stepped forward in consultation with hospitals to try to change and accelerate protocols to help to get individuals who are non-COVID-19 patients who could be transferred out of hospitals into long-term care centers, skilled nursing facilities, or even coordinated services at home. That takes some pressure off of the delivery system, the acute delivery system, and creates more capacity for the needs of COVID-19 patients. Lastly, as we're seeing, there's an imbalance taking place, not just in terms of the acute healthcare system, but also around the country. So as the waves move through the country, we have the opportunity for learning to take place as best practices are happening from some of the initial hotspots like the Pacific Northwest or now Greater New York for other locales to learn in advance and be more prepared from that standpoint. So quite sophisticated. People are pulling together in cross-industry ways I've not seen before in my career, but it is under strain, and we need to be supportive of our healthcare professionals accordingly.
Finally, David, how is Cigna itself holding up? You have a lot of employees whose work is really critical, incredibly critical right now. How do you protect them at the same time that we have them deliver the services that we really need?
So I appreciate the question. We have over 70,000 colleagues around the world, and we dealt early on with the COVID-19 challenges in Greater China and then South Korea and matching around the world. What we've done is, first and foremost, work where at all possible to help our colleagues have the proper capabilities to work from home to be safe. Secondly, for our colleagues who need to be physically present in an office or delivery infrastructure, be it tied to care delivery, care coordination, pharmacy servicing, etc., key technology resources, we've sought to make sure we have the right social distancing and infrastructure around them. We've increased payroll for those individuals who actually have to be on site. So we've increased what we're paying. We've added another 10 days of what we call emergency PTO or paid time off for individuals who may need additional time off during this unique time frame to care for parents, to care for children, just to manage the household or otherwise from that standpoint. And we're pressing ourselves to make sure we have broad connectivity in our organization and communicating on a regular basis. So I'm really proud of the way our team is holding up, putting our patients and customers front and center, but we're also trying to make sure we're being mindful of the strain that our colleagues are under right now, and so far, so good from that standpoint.
Okay, David, thank you so very much for spending time with us today. That's David Cordani. He is the president and CEO of Cigna. And now it's time for Bloomberg First Word News. And for that, we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. European officials are warning against loosening lockdowns. That's after the coronavirus outbreak claimed more than 3,000 lives in Spain and Italy over the weekend. The total death toll for the two countries is now over 17,000. The pace of fatalities and infections is showing signs of leveling off. We just learned that Italy has reported the lowest number of cases in nearly 2 weeks, but officials are warning against complacency. President Trump says that he plans to call Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss that country's oil price war with Saudi Arabia and the global response to the coronavirus pandemic. Mr. Trump says he doesn't want to see the energy sector, quote, wiped out over low oil prices brought on by the conflict feud. Oil recovered slightly after tumbling to $19.92, a 17-year low. Hungary's parliament has handed Prime Minister Viktor Orban the right to rule by decree indefinitely, effectively putting the European Union democracy under his sole command. Hungary's ruling party overrode objections from the opposition in a vote today, handing Orban the right to bypass the assembly on any law. The justice minister dismissed criticism, saying measures will be taken that will be proportionate to fighting the coronavirus. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will go into quarantine. His office says he came into contact with an aide who tested positive for the virus. Netanyahu and his staff will stay in isolation while they await the results of their tests. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. Coming up here, we're going to be joined by David McIntosh at the Club for Growth, what he likes about that $2 trillion package and what he would have done differently. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Bloomberg. Jason Kelly.
I love dogs and cats. Short-haired, long-haired. I love you all, don't I, Bianca? But I don't love cat hair all over my carpet, which is why I got a job testing vacuum cleaners in the Witch Test Lab. We rub an exact amount of real pet hair into an exact area of real carpet to see which vacuum cleaners really suck it up. And the vacuums that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your home. Which.co.uk. Our tests find you the best.
This is a vital update from the government about coronavirus. To help save lives, stay at home. Anyone can spread coronavirus. Only leave your home for the following reasons: to shop for basic necessities, to pick up medicine or to provide care to those who need it, to exercise once a day, alone or with members of your household. Only travel to work when you absolutely cannot work from home. If you have to go out for any of these reasons, always stay 2 meters apart. Do not meet others outside your household, even friends and family. Stay home. Protect the NHS. Save lives.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks are rallying as investors see glimmers of optimism in healthcare efforts to deliver rapid virus testing, and the dollar's up. The S&P climbed for the 4th time in 5 days, even after a weekend full of negative pandemic news, including President Donald Trump's abrupt order to extend recommendations aimed at inhibiting the spread of the virus. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500 is up 2.25%, up 57. The Dow is up nearly 2%, up 419. And the NASDAQ is up 2.5%, up 191. The 10-year is up 11/32. The yield is 0.63%. West Texas Intermediate crude is down 5.75% at $20.28 a barrel, and COMEX gold is down 0.8% at $6.41 even per ounce. The dollar yen stands at 107.96. The euro $1.1017. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. We return to Balance of Power with David Weston.
This is Bloomberg Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I am David Weston. Most people, particularly the markets, really like that $2 trillion stimulus package or spending package that we got last week. But some people ask some questions about it, including David McIntosh. He is president, of course, of the Club for Growth, and he joins us now. So, David, give us a sense. First of all, thank you for joining us. Secondly, give us a sense. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it?
Thank you, David, and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I hope everybody's well there. I'm worried about the overall deficit that it's creating. The $2 trillion figure, when you put it on top of the $2 trillion that they spent earlier in the year, that's $4 trillion plus whatever the Federal Reserve is doing. But we recognize there's a crisis, and the economy is being shut down by the different government actions, so something needs to be done.
Within that, what we like is that much of the program is set up as a loan program so that some of that can be repaid to the federal government. We think that's a smart way to do it. We also are, basically, I view it as a lost opportunity. The cash payments don't stimulate economic growth. They're just a transfer payment. So we would have suggested switching that into monies that would have directly gone to businesses to create and keep jobs so that people could stay employed. And then our big mantra is, first of all, do no harm. And in the previous bill, I think the House and Senate and Mnuchin negotiated this mandatory paid leave provision. And small businesses, that creates a huge cash flow problem, even if the government says they'll pay them back and make them whole someday. And so I suspect that's one of the reasons we saw an even higher spike in unemployment as small businesses looked at that coming down the pike. They're already losing revenue dramatically and thinking, I don't have cash to make payments to employees. I'll have to let them go and let them qualify for unemployment insurance.
So that may have put some burden on small business. There was also a fair amount of provision in there for helping small business, which is so much the engine that drives the U.S. economy, and particularly employment, as you suggest. Are we doing enough for small business?
I think a lot of the loan programs are very good. I think giving them as much flexibility and bridge loans, essentially, so they can get through the cash crunch is going to be important. But honestly, the most important thing for small business will be, when it is safe, reopen the economy, because that's how they can survive and do well. And I know the president now has extended to the end of April the date when the things were going to need to be shut down. We've got to talk to the scientists and the doctors to understand the medical needs. But on the top of everybody's list has got to be, okay, but as soon as it's safe to open up, maybe just parts of it. Maybe young people can go back to work because they're less likely to be affected by this. Or we'll have to figure out ways to reopen the economy as soon as it makes sense.
What do you make of that? Because it's becoming really a sort of an ethical debate across the country about whether we should take some risks, knowing that some people might lose their lives to get the economy going. And some people, like Lloyd Blankfein, for example, from Goldman Sachs, says if you crash the economy, you're going to lose lives because of that.
He's absolutely right. There's studies after study that show unemployment actually increases the death rate for people who are on unemployment or not occupied. And so there's a balance of risk. I think it's important for the healthcare system and the president to put things into context of, I saw today an estimate, maybe 200,000 deaths. There are over 2 million deaths a year in the United States, but that's a big number. And one of the things I think everybody's buying into and makes sense is flatten that curve of exposure so that more of those people could be treated and lives saved that way, and the healthcare system isn't overwhelmed with the big spike. I mean, basically, epidemiologists tell us when you have a new bug like this that is potentially deadly, it's going to spread quickly and it'll be an epidemic, and then the society adjusts to it. Our natural immunities kick in. We have people that are not vulnerable to it, but we've got to get our society through that spike and then reopen the economy to keep people going after that.
And finally, David, what about the grants to the large corporations? You talked about small business. I know the Democrats put some restrictions on that, some oversight. Did you approve of that?
I think the most important thing is to keep things very flexible and to not have the government start picking winners and losers on those larger corporations. As much as possible, do it as a bridge loan and then let it get back into the marketplace. And stock values will start to go back up, as the president said. Some will take longer, right? It'll take a while for the cruise industry to recover because people will be less likely to take cruises for a while until their comfort level goes back up. The government shouldn't prop up every business and every industry, but I think we should provide that liquidity in the short term to help in that way. One of the things we should avoid are mandates. I talked with you earlier about the Defense Production Act. that's a way of ensuring that it actually is harder for business to respond to the crisis, because they have to sit around and wait for orders from Washington exactly when they make things, how much, and where.
Yeah. That's fascinating. David, thank you so very much. This is David McIntosh. He's the president of the Club for Growth. Coming up later in the program, we're going to talk with Senator Ted Cruz of Texas about exactly what needs to be done for the states and their budgets. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Asset managers.
3 is a magic number. 300 schemes to help bugs and bees, supporting environmental needs. 8,000 grants for local sports, and performing arts get our support. 7 millionaires every week, the nation's on a winning streak. 30 million pounds to good causes every week. Who'd have thought it? These are magic numbers.
Your numbers make amazing happen. The National Lottery.
Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Apply by the 31st of March for a chance to win your first year in halls. Visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
At Dell, when we created the new XPS 13 laptop, we treated every little piece like it was everything. We crafted every part as if it were the most important thing we'd ever made. The result? Something you'll have to see to believe. Pity this is radio. See the new award-winning Dell XPS 13 at dell.co.uk. Every little thing is everything.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
Time now for Stock of the Hour. From there, we turn to Kaylee Alliance. Kaylee?
David, I'm looking at American and United Airlines. They're down about 11 and 6% respectively today. An analyst over at Bernstein, David Vernon, said they have less than 2 months before they run out of cash given their current liquidity levels. For American, for example, it had less than $250 million in cash at year end. Now, Vernon isn't saying they're going to go bankrupt in 2 months. He notes that they do still have other assets. And then, of course, you do have stimulus aid coming from that package that President Trump just signed on Friday, $61 billion for airlines. If American got $12 billion of that, for example, he says their cash could last for closer to a year. But stimulus aside, it's not really aiding sentiment when it comes to the airlines. The S&P Composite Airline Index is down about 35% this month, on pace for its worst month on record. And that's because even if the government gives them aid to weather this storm for longer, there's no telling how long this storm is going to last. And that demand for air travel has just absolutely collapsed as the coronavirus continues to spread, David.
Okay, thanks so much to Kaylee Alliance. Coming up here, we're going to talk with Alex Gorski of Johnson & Johnson about that candidate they've identified for a possible coronavirus vaccine. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are up 2%, led higher by healthcare shares as investors see glimmers of hope in rapid virus testing. Abbott Labs surged after unveiling a 5-minute coronavirus test, and Johnson & Johnson says it will begin human testing of a COVID-19 vaccine as early as September. But it's survival of the fittest among airlines, and that's bad news for American and United, according to a Bernstein analyst. David Vernon says those two carriers have only 2 months before they'll run out of cash. However, he believes Delta and Southwest will be able to survive longer for up to 5 to 8 months. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says the small business loan program should be up and running this week, and workers eligible for aid from the $2 trillion stimulus package should see checks in about 3 weeks. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven by uncertainty about the virus.
Political reversals.
It's not clear that some of the Republicans up on the Hill are agreed with the Republican White House.
Economic shifts.
The macro clearly being driven by the coronavirus outbreak.
Everything seems to be in motion.
Will it also mean a global recession in your view now?
But here, you're on solid ground.
Looking forward to guiding you through all of this.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. We want to go now for First Word News to Mark Crumpton.
David, Italy reported the lowest number of new coronavirus cases in almost 2 weeks as the epicenter of Europe's contagion enters its 4th week of lockdown. New infections in the past 24 hours totaled 4,050 compared with 5,217 the previous day. It's the smallest increase since March 17th. However, fatalities from the disease rose by more than 800 on Monday, compared with 756 a day earlier. Italy now has more than 100,000 cases of coronavirus. Spain is reporting more than 800 new virus deaths today. That's down slightly from the previous day, but total fatalities in Spain are now well over 7,000. As Spain battles Europe's worst outbreak after Italy, the country is tightening restrictions on the public. Those who work in non-essential services are being told to stay home during the Easter period. And over the weekend in Spain, the number of patients who needed intensive care surpassed the number of available hospital beds. South Korea is giving gift certificates and electronic coupons to all but its wealthiest citizens. The move is to help deal with fallout from the coronavirus pandemic. Most of the payouts will be about $800. South Korea says the measure will cost more than $17 billion. Officials ruled out giving cash to ensure an increase in consumer spending. A new start date has been chosen for the Tokyo Olympics. Japanese broadcaster TBS is reporting the Games will kick off on July 23rd, 2021. The Olympic Games had been set to take place in Tokyo this summer, but were postponed because of the coronavirus pandemic. Japan has spent more than $26 billion to get Tokyo ready for the Games. That's according to some estimates. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Johnson & Johnson made news today when it said that it identified, working with HHS, a possible candidate for a coronavirus vaccine. It'll go into testing in September, and in success, if it succeeds, we could have something as early as the second quarter of next year. Earlier today, I got to talk with the chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, Alex Gorski.
We're very hopeful as we look at our early data that in these cases tends to be, quite correlated with what we would expect to see as we take this into human testing in September of this year. But we also know we need to complete those other trials, and we'll be doing that. At the same time, we're going to be ramping up our production, and we'll have global production. We expect to have that both in Europe as well as the United States, and we expect to be in a position by the first quarter to have a much better perspective on the vaccine itself, on the kind of quantities that we would have available. Our goal is to have hundreds of millions available by that time. And then obviously to work with regulators and other people around the world, depending on where the coronavirus is at that time, to try to make this accessible on an emergency basis.
Alex, give us a sense of what that testing process is. Is it the normal testing process you'd have for another vaccine, or given the urgency and the size of this problem, are there certain things that can be done to expedite that?
Well, David, look, my sense is that regulators, both in Europe and the United States, let alone around the world, other healthcare authorities and the government are doing everything they can to expedite this. At the same time, we have to balance that to make sure that we gather the efficacy, the safety data that's so important before, of course, we would be using this on a large scale. Now, in this particular case, we're working with a platform. So think of it as a vaccine, part of a vaccine, where we've got significant experience in areas like SARS, things like Ebola, things like HIV. And so we are confident in the safety data that we've seen thus far. And it's already, the vector's been used in elderly, it's been used in younger children. And so that gives us confidence from a safety perspective. The early testing that we've done so far, that includes a range of animal as well as in vivo testing, also indicates that we should have an active vaccine as well. But of course, we need to complete the trials that we'll be doing in humans in the fourth quarter, before we develop the final data set, that would help us make that decision at the appropriate moment.
So to push ahead and push perhaps farther than we should, if you were successful in the fourth quarter, when would we have a vaccine available to people?
So, David, look, what we would intend to do, again, work closely with regulators so that by late December or early January, we would expect to have some type of interim analysis in our first in human trials. And then at that point, we would have to take a look at that data set in its totality. I think clearly we would be also looking at how is the virus proceeding and what kind of state is it in around the world, and then make a decision. So I think at some point in the second quarter, we could be in a position, again, on an emergency basis, depending on where the pandemic is going, where there could be some access to this. And then we would expect that to ramp up significantly over the rest of the year.
Give us a sense, because I know you're committing a lot of funds to production, not just the development of the vaccine, but in success to be able to produce a lot of it. How big could you get? How soon, if in fact it does work?
Well, you're right, David. To have a vaccine to really work effectively, it takes two components at least. I mean, first of all, it's demonstrating efficacy and safety of your vaccine. And that's what we're working very hard on, literally as we speak. But also, as I said, some of our trials will start in September in human. We'll have some additional data by December. But you also need to produce them in sufficient volumes and quantity so that you can actually make a difference in the broader population. And we're very fortunate in that we have a very unique production capability where it gives us the ability in relatively small containers to make very large volumes in the hundreds of millions of doses of this vaccine. Now, again, let me be clear. We still have more work to do to determine the exact yield of these particular technologies and to compare that versus the safety and efficacy data. But based upon the original work that we've done, again, we feel quite confident that we can be in the range of hundreds of millions of vaccines as we would move into the early part of 2001 with the goal to have 1 billion in place by the end of the year.
And you want just the Dow thing, right? Okay. That was, of course, Alex Gorski. He is the chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson. Coming up later today, I'm going to talk with the CEO of Dow. He's Jim Fitterling. They're making a big announcement about really ramping up production of hand sanitizer. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
leaders.
So you run into a competitor at an industry event. You get to chatting about business, how you're both doing. All pretty standard. Then someone mentions prices. Maybe you agree to stop undercutting each other. Still just business, right? Wrong. Coordinating prices with your competitors is called price fixing. It's cheating and illegal. And you could be facing big fines or even prison when you get caught. Search cheating or competing to check your business practices before we check them for you. Brought to you by the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
TuneIn makes it easy to be a part of the conversation. Just make sure push notifications are enabled to hear about breaking news and trending topics from around the sports world. You'll also get custom recommendations of podcasts and radio stations covering the sports and teams you care about.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with our Washington correspondent about the many political battles being waged in the Capitol over how to deal with the new coronavirus.
You couldn't imagine a president personalizing a crisis with a virus, but somehow that's where we are.
Susan Glasser. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
Consumer staples among the biggest gainers, while oil futures are down to an 18-year intraday low after President Donald Trump extended his stay-at-home guidance to April 30th. Meanwhile, American Express says it will freeze hiring after equipping more than 60,000 employees to work from home in response to the coronavirus epidemic. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P 500 is up 2.5%, up 64. Dow is up 2.2%, up 478. And the Nasdaq's up 2.9%, up 214. The 10-year is up 15/30 seconds with a yield of 0.62%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 5.8% at $20.27 a barrel, while COMEX gold is down 0.6% at $16.4430 an ounce. The dollar yen is at 107.89, the euro $1.1023. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. David Weston returns with more Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. I'm David Weston. We want to talk about oil now because it really hit some extraordinarily low numbers, particularly with WTI at one point going below $20 a barrel. At the same time, President Trump says he wants to call Vladimir Putin over in Russia to see if he can adjust those prices somewhat. We now turn to Bloomberg's Pratish Narayanan for a report on exactly what's going on with oil. Pratish, thanks for joining us. Give us your sense.
It's essentially what we're facing is a pretty unprecedented situation where we have a glut of supply, and that's what caused most of the previous oil crashes that we've seen recently. But what's unique about the current situation is that demand is also crashing because of the coronavirus crisis. So as economic activity goes down, as people stay at home, fuel use is coming down, so people just don't need as much oil. But at the same time, the likes of Saudi Arabia, Russia mainly, they are pumping more and more into the market because they want to kind of sell as many barrels as possible and keep their market share. So that's the situation we're seeing. That's why you're seeing oil basically get beaten down below $20 a barrel today.
So, Pratish, give us a sense of what really would be in it for Vladimir Putin to accommodate President Trump. We have all those sanctions on Russia, particularly going after that Nord Stream pipeline up through the North Sea. What could President Trump, or might he have to give Vladimir Putin to really get him to bring the price of oil up?
Essentially, well, there has been speculation in the market that Putin went ahead and started this price war with Saudi Arabia more to hurt the U.S. and by extension the shale industry in the U.S. rather than going and having a fight with Saudi Arabia. Now, obviously the U.S. has placed sanctions on various Russian entities, including their oil companies. So that might be a concession that Putin is probably seeking. We don't know. We don't know the exact nature of the talks at this point, but that is presumably what he's seeking. But also, Trump is limited in his response because if he is to ease sanctions on Russia, he will need the backing of Congress, and that's probably not likely in this current situation.
How much damage is being done to the shale producers right now? We see energy company after energy company cutting back on capital investment. How much are they really taking out that can't really go back very easily?
For the likes of Saudi Arabia, the cost of production is very low. Essentially, they can produce a barrel of oil at essentially $3. But that's not the same case with shale. It requires anywhere from $25 to $30 a barrel for it to be commercially viable. And now with prices consistently kind of going down below that $25 a barrel level, many of these companies are essentially facing, having to produce at a loss. And that's obviously not sustainable. Many of their credit lines are already stretched. They're not kind of able to go to equity markets. They're not able to go to debt markets. So you could see a lot of essentially crashes and bankruptcies going forward.
So, Pratish, we hear about the cost of extraction, but there's also something I've heard called the fiscal break-even point, which is, I'm told, higher for Saudi Arabia than for Russia. How much pressure does Vladimir Putin have on him with respect to his own budget back home?
Russia, to its credit, over the past few years, they've worked to kind of reduce their reliance on oil revenue, especially after the 2015 oil crash when they were really hit. They made some changes where they wouldn't actually be so dependent. And that's probably given him a bit more confidence to go after Saudi Arabia and also the U.S. in this particular price war. So they have made those changes.
And Pratish, final question. We have both Saudi Arabia and Russia basically opening the spigot, really ramping up production as part of this price war. Can they afford to do that forever? Where are they going to store all this oil?
Yes, and that is one of the main concerns right now, because world over, a lot of this oil is coming out in the market. People, refineries are shutting down. They're not producing as much fuel. So where is all this going to go, and be stored? One option is obviously ships, but that costs as well. There are on-land storage facilities, but increasingly we are facing the risk where they will essentially top off. And there is even the possibility that some physical oil prices could go negative, which would effectively mean producers will have to pay buyers to take it out of their hands.
So finally, Pratish, we talk a lot about the equity markets these days and trying to find a bottom, for example, with the S&P. Can you see anything like a bottom for oil at this point, or is it just going down?
At the moment, as incredible as it might seem, there doesn't seem to be a bottom. We've seen in the physical market of actual barrels, prices actually going down to negative. 1 or 2 grades in the U.S. have. So, at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a bottom, and prices are just relentlessly falling.
Okay, Pratish, thank you so very much. That's Bloomberg's own Pratish Narayanan reporting on oil. Coming up next here, we're going to talk with Senator Ted Cruz of the state of Texas about that stimulus, that spending package we saw, and what is being done for the states and those governments that are losing money hand over fist. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Have you ever thought, I wish I'd had that information sooner?
What does this tell us about the state of deal making?
Let's fix that.
One unprofitable company plus another doesn't make a profitable company.
Carol Masser.
Talk to us about real-world applications.
Jason Kelly.
Remind us what the potential is for everyday folks.
Bloomberg Business Week.
Vice President of Exploratory Science is one of the cooler titles.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg Business Week, now live on YouTube.
Melissa from Michigan. I work an extra part-time job serving lunch at my child's school, but I still can't afford to put food on our table.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon N.A. Member FDIC.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. I'm David Weston. Well, Congress had quite a busy week last week, but before they got out of town, they passed a $2.2 trillion spending package to try to help the U.S. economy through this crisis right now. We have on the phone with us now one of those involved in this. He is Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, and we welcome you, Senator. Thank you for being here. First of all, give us a sense. Do you think you've done enough for now, or is there more to come?
Well, David, it's good to be with you. Thank you for having me. And I think what we've done now is emergency relief for now. What the ultimate question is when we are able to get under control and defeat this global pandemic. That's what's driving all of the rest of this. We have two crises that are playing out simultaneously. We have a public health crisis with a growing pandemic, and we have to get that under control. We've got, secondly, an economic crisis that is the direct results of the aggressive steps we're taking to contain the global pandemic. And the legislation that Congress passed last week was emergency relief legislation designed to provide real relief to the millions of people across this country right now who are hurting, who've lost their jobs, to the small businesses that are in crisis. If the crisis continues for substantially longer, I have no doubt that Congress will have to act yet again.
There are so many people and so many businesses are hurting because we've, on purpose, for good and sufficient reason, really almost stopped the economy throughout a lot of the United States. We also are hearing about the states, the individual states, who are getting crushed both with dramatically increased costs in fighting this coronavirus, but also dramatically reduced revenues because of taxes. Is there enough in this bill to take care of the states?
Well, there's very substantial amounts in this bill for the states. In the bill of the $2 trillion, $150 billion of that goes directly to the states, and it goes to the cities as well. And so it's the states and municipalities are getting $150 billion for their coronavirus efforts, for what they're having to expend additionally combating the coronavirus. In addition to that, there's $100 billion that goes directly to hospitals and other medical facilities. So that's $250 billion right on the front end. But there's also a great bit of immediate relief for individuals and for small businesses. If you look at individuals, every American who earns $100,000 or less is going to get a check, and is going to get a check If you earn $75,000 or less, the check will be $1,200 per adult. That means if you're a couple, you're going to get $2,400 if the two of you make $150,000 or less, and $500 for each child. That means a couple with 3 kids will get a check for $3,900. That's real money, and that's designed to provide relief for families that right now may be laid off, may not be sure where the rent is coming from next week, and that's designed to help them through this economic devastation we're seeing as a result of the health crisis.
Senator Cruz, how confident are you that we can get the money to the individuals and the companies, particularly small businesses, fast enough? Because part of the problem, we saw the jobless claims just shoot up last week, and part of it's because you have small businesses such as restaurants, for example, who just have to lay people off right away. Can we get money to them fast enough so that people won't be losing their jobs?
Well, I certainly hope so, and let's take it in 2 tranches. Number one, the individual relief. That's going out through the IRS. And Treasury has projected that they expect that to take 2 to 3 weeks. If you are a taxpayer who direct deposits your taxes, in other words, if they have your bank account number and you usually get a refund direct deposited into your bank account, Treasury believes they'll do it faster in that circumstances. The General Counsel of the IRS told me he thought those could get out as early as April 8th. It just depends upon how quickly they can execute. On the other hand, if you need to receive a check, printing the checks, mailing the checks through snail mail, that will take longer, but it's still, Treasury is intending to get it out in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and what Congress specified is to get the checks out there as soon as humanly possible. On the small business side, there is direct and immediate relief, and this may be the most important part of the legislation we passed. It is $377 billion in emergency loans to small businesses. Now, a small business is defined as a business with 500 or fewer employees. And if you're right now, if you're listening or watching this today, and you're a small business owner, you can go and get an emergency loan. Maybe you've laid off a substantial number of your employees. You can go, the loans are administered through the Small Business Administration, but it's implemented directly through the banks and the local community banks. So small business owners can go to the banker you normally deal with for business banking needs. And if they're a small business accredited lender, they can administer the loan. The loan can be up to $10 million, so it's designed to be for businesses like restaurants, like bars, like hardware stores, like nail salons, all of these restaurants that, as you noted, have been laying people off in massive numbers. And you can get a loan quickly that is guaranteed. And here's the part that is unusual. If you use that loan to pay salary, to pay mortgage or rent on your business, or to pay utilities, that loan will be forgiven. In other words, it becomes a grant. And so the intention of this is for small businesses to keep their employees on the payroll so that the employees keep getting a paycheck, and so that the restaurant, so that the bar, so that the gym, so that the movie theater doesn't have to shutter their business and be driven into bankruptcy. This is designed to really be a bridge loan to get through the crisis, but the amount that goes to salary and mortgage and rents is forgiven and is a grant to keep those small businesses afloat and prepared to thrive again once we combat and defeat this pandemic.
Senator, finally and quickly, we're all experiencing social distancing. When will we see Congress convene again?
That is unclear. Right now, we are scheduled to return on April 21st. So the plan is to give it some time, give it 3 full weeks, and then come back then. But depending on the state of the health crisis, if it is still a serious public health threat, it would not surprise me to see that date pushed back. You know, if you look at the U.S. Senate, you've got 100 people, quite a few of whom are in their 70s or in their 80s, are potentially in a vulnerable population. And so We met in person the last 2 weeks and passed this legislation, but I think there's some understanding that all of us, I'm at my home, I'm working from home, most of us have gone home to the States, and I'm on the phone with Texans all across the state and the phone across the country working from home right now.
Senator, thank you so much, and we wish that health and safety for both you and your family. Thank you very much. That's Ted Cruz, Senator from the state of Texas. Coming up in the second hour of Balance of Power on radio, we're going to go more deeply into the question about whether we have enough aid coming to the states given all of their pressures. That is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television. And
this is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury. In the age of coronavirus, with gymnasiums and fitness centers closed, how can we possibly stay in shape? Arnold Schwarzenegger took to Reddit recently to share a home workout anyone can do. The former California governor said, and I will not attempt the accent, gladiators and Vikings didn't have gymnasiums. Schwarzenegger prescribes a routine of body weight exercises such as push-ups, leg raises, squats and dips, and rows between chairs. U.S. gamblers have turned to Eastern European table tennis, with major sports schedules dark. Ping pong matches from Russia and Ukraine accounted for nearly 60% of the funds wagered on DraftKings over the past week. Companies also created free-to-enter pools around other types of entertainment, such as Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm on HBO and The Last Democratic Debate, offering options like, what will Bernie Sanders say first, millionaire or billionaire? Another accent I won't try. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
There are times when you have to go it alone, but these should not be those times.
With a medical crisis, can any other central bank execute?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro in the coming months.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Do we have the ability to coordinate with this virus?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at bevel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is an up Monday with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all rallying as investors see glimmers of optimism in efforts to deliver rapid virus testing. S&P 500 index up for the fourth time in 5 days, even after a weekend full of negative pandemic news as President Trump extended recommendations aimed at inhibiting the spread. Here's where we stand. S&P 500 index up 69 points. That is a gain of 2.7%. The Dow is up 519 points, up 2.4%, and NASDAQ is higher by 232 points, up now by 3.1%. The 10-year up 12/30 seconds, the yield 0.63%. Gold is down 0.4%, lower by $7 the ounce at $16.21. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is moving lower, did trade below $19 a barrel. WTI down 5.4% right now at $20.34. Brent, the global benchmark, is down 10% today. Barrel of Brent is at $22.43. Abbott Lab shares, they're rallying 8.2% after the company unveiled a coronavirus test that can tell if someone is infected in as little as 5 minutes and is so small and portable that it can be used in almost any healthcare setting. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
We have the strongest economy by far in the world.
We need an economy that works for everybody. I am the one who has the broadest coalition.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
They've got the money they need to run a very competitive race.
These lawyers brought the case, and in my view, they should be sanctioned. We want certainty in the markets. We want certainty in our trading relationships.
The administration is trying to create a new divided world.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
From New York, welcome to the second hour about Bloomberg Balance of Power. We have been speaking with Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of the state of Texas, and I'm delighted to say he has stayed with us. Thank you so much for remaining with us, Senator Cruz. It is not the time for second guessing. That doesn't do anybody any good. At the same time, when you have a crisis like this, it always behooves us to take a look at what's going on to see whether we could be making any improvements. As you see our government, federal and state and local, respond, are there areas that you think we should be looking at and tweaking at least, if not reforming?
Well, look, in any crisis, I think the response of government, there are going to be good aspects and bad aspects, and that's true of here as well. As I look at the administration and how they're doing, I think the most important step that the administration took and that the president took was early on in January, halting flights in and out of China. At the time, the president was criticized for doing that. I spoke to him at the time and told him it was exactly the right decision to take. The virus, the outbreak was just beginning in Wuhan, China, and I chaired a hearing on the spread of the Wuhan virus a little over a month ago now, and heard testimony from experts at the CDC, at the Department of Transportation, at Customs and Border Patrol, and all three of the expert witnesses testified that the decision to halt commercial air travel into and out of China played a very, very significant role slowing this virus down, reducing the number of cases and the number of deaths in the United States. So I think that has been done well. When you look at what hasn't been done well, I think what was the rockiest in the initial phase was the rollout of the testing, and then the rollout of the testing should have been better. The problem was the administration tried to do the rollout of the testing, keep it all within the federal government, within the CDC. The CDC had designed the test. They wanted to make the test internally within the federal government, but they had some problems in rolling it out, some problems with contamination of the kit. That substantially slowed down the rollout of the test. Instead, the way they should have done it is how they ended up doing it at the end of that process, which is allowing the private sector to assist and engage and removing the FDA barriers for private labs, for things like the Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic, to develop tests and to roll out those tests. And we've seen that now, but we need to continue to do more to get testing available in the front lines. David, I've emphasized in terms of combating this pandemic that we focus on four priorities. Number one, testing, getting testing more widely available and more accurate. Number two, protective gear for our first responders, gear for our medical professionals who are risking their lives, from masks to gowns to gloves, ensuring that we have that protective gear in place. And I've laid out a whole series of steps the administration can and should take to make that happen. Number three, enhancing our medical capacity and making sure we have critical medical equipment like ventilators that those who are acutely ill need to breathe. You look at what's happening in Italy with their socialized medicine system there, where they don't have enough medical equipment, and they're making horrifying triage decisions of deciding who's going to live and who's going to die. And I don't want to see the United States in a position where we are denying anyone needed life-saving medical equipment and medical treatment. And so we need to do much more to get the hospital ICU beds, to get the ventilators that we need, so we don't face 2, 3, 4 weeks from now a situation like Italy. And fourth and finally, we need to prioritize the development of vaccines, treatments for this disease, and ultimately a cure for COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus. And I've laid out and have introduced legislation to streamline the FDA approval to accelerate vaccines and treatments and a cure getting developed and getting approved.
Senator Cruz, I can't thank you enough for staying with us. Really appreciate it. That is Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of the state of Texas. I want to go focus on part of that $2 trillion spending package now. It includes some money for the states, but they need a lot of help as they've been hit both by the dramatic increase in expenses and in fighting the coronavirus, and also a sharp decline in revenue as economies come to a virtual halt with much of the tax revenue going along with it. We welcome now Josh Goodman of the Pew Charitable Trusts, where he is Senior Officer for Economic Development and State Fiscal Health. So, Josh, thanks so much for joining us and for your patience. Give us a sense of how bad the situation is for a lot of the states. We hear about it almost daily from Governor Cuomo here in New York.
Yeah, well, happy to be with you. So the answer right now is states really aren't sure how bad it's going to be. And if you think about state budgets, they're built around tax revenue from personal income taxes and sales taxes. So if people are working fewer hours, if people are being laid off, that's less personal income tax revenue. If consumers are spending less money, as they are, that's less sales tax revenue. But states are going to feel those effects gradually, and they know they'll be significant, but they're just starting to feel them now and get a handle on how bad this will be for their budgets.
So when we look at the federal level, they just spent $2.2 trillion, and they simply borrow it. But the states, a lot of them, don't have that option, right? Don't they have some balanced budget requirements?
Exactly. So states generally don't have nearly the flexibility the federal government does to engage in deficit spending. States generally have to balance their budgets each year. They generally can't borrow for operating expenses, sort of the routine expenses to pay workers, things like that. And so really the first line of defense for states are rainy day funds, which is money that they save in good times to use in crises like this. And the good news there is that states have saved more than they ever have before, or at least in 20 years. And so many states do have substantial savings, but whether they'll be enough for this situation is very, very much an open question.
What happens if they run out of money?
Well, states have ways they can cut. I mean, they can lay off workers. What you saw in the Great Recession was that, states did things like reduced funding for higher education, and what that led to is really substantial tuition increases across the country. States cut back on local aid, so aid to local government, so they sort of pushed the pain down. Many of them raised taxes. And so whether it's spending cuts or tax increases that states rely on to balance the budget, that takes money out of the economy. It makes it harder for the nation as a whole to recover. So there are big implications for regular people all over the country. If states get in financial trouble, it matters for all of us.
What about this $2.2 trillion spending package that got passed last Friday? What does that do for the states? We just talked to Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. He said there's a fair amount of money in there for the states.
Right. So one of the big parts of the legislation that was just signed last week by President Trump was this $150 billion fund that's aid to state and local governments. In addition to that $150 billion fund, both in this legislation and earlier legislation, there's a variety of other provisions designed to help both state and local governments. And so the big question now is how much of a difference will that make? How large will it be in the context of states' budget problems? And because states are just starting to find out how big those problems will be, because it's really a moving target, a lot of it depends how long the economy is really sort of shut down for. States aren't really sure yet, how far will that go, and will they be asking the federal government for another round of assistance in the future?
Josh, when we have these kind of crises, we tend to try to look back in history for some indication of what was done before, what we might do this time. Are there precedents here that are helpful that would indicate what can be done for the states?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like what Congress is doing now in the Great Recession, there was federal aid to states. The federal government's aid in the Great Recession was linked highly to schools and to Medicaid, and that's part of the model that the federal government is once again following this year. I think one of the big lessons coming out of the Great Recession is, that pain for states lasted a very, very long time. It was almost like a lost decade for states where years later their workforces were still much smaller than they were before the Great Recession. In some key areas such as higher ed, they were spending far less, and that meant tuition was higher. Just K through 12 schools, it took a long time for pupil funding to bounce back in many states. And so we're talking about an immediate crisis right now, but I think one of the big questions for states and for all of us, again, is whether the pain will, go away once this epidemic is over, or whether there'll be these lasting implications for all levels of government in the United States.
Okay, thank you so much to Josh Goodman of the Pew Charitable Trust. Now we're going to go live to Boston, where we have Charlie Baker giving a news conference.
Of our surge capacity plan to help hospitals free up more space. We launched another project in cooperation with the Mass Medical Society to recruit medical professionals to support our medical providers. And I'll also share some information regarding unemployment assistance the unemployment assistance process as it relates to the CARES Act, which I think everybody knows the President signed a couple of days ago. Over the weekend, the Commonwealth conducted close to 10,000 new tests for COVID-19 on our residents, which brings our total number of tests to almost 40,000 conducted at 21 labs statewide. And on both Saturday and Sunday, we continued to exceed our goal of 3,500 tests a day. We'll continue to expand testing capacity as time goes on. And as we said before, ramped up testing combined with tracing and tracking and isolation and quarantine is going to be a key to how we move forward in the long run on managing this virus. Well, these have been unprecedented and difficult times. The people of the Commonwealth continue to respond with tremendous strength and generosity. We're fortunate to be home to many resourceful people and successful businesses that have met this pandemic as an opportunity to do something positive and good for their communities. Our command center has been contacted by hundreds of individuals and businesses willing to donate or sell personal protective equipment or PPE to the Commonwealth. Over the weekend, we also received a shipment of PPE from the Strategic National Stockpile. Deliveries began on Saturday and have continued through Sunday, and the warehouse has been inventorying items throughout the weekend. We also heard over the weekend that the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at Health and Human Services at the federal level approved our request for at least 1,000 ventilators, and we should be receiving those soon. So far, we've made hundreds of deliveries to frontline healthcare providers and first responders, and last week, more than 28,000 masks and 120,000 pairs of gloves were distributed, and we currently have approximately $50 million on order for additional supplies. But obviously, we will need more. Yesterday, the Command Center launched an online portal where individuals and companies can donate or contract with the Commonwealth to supply PPE. The portal is simple and a very streamlined and easy way for our Command Center to process, collect, and distribute donations more effectively. By visiting the COVID-19 PPE procurement and donation website, businesses and organizations can sell or donate critically needed personal protective equipment, and this would include N95 masks, surgical masks, respirators, goggles, gloves, protective gowns, and hand sanitizer. And the new program isn't just about donating or selling. We've also heard from many people and businesses who may not have gear to send us, but do have facilities that properly converted can be used to generate gear all the time. And our administration's created a process where local manufacturers can get more information on how their businesses can start to produce the equipment we will all need. This function is a result of our Manufacturing Emergency Response Team, which is co-chaired by Housing and Economic Development Secretary Mike Keneally and Mike Tomasi, who's the president and CEO of AccuRones. We've already seen Massachusetts companies do this, and it's both impressive and inspiring. For example, New Balance will begin manufacturing face masks for those battling coronavirus. They're producing prototypes in their Lawrence manufacturing facility and hope to scale production using their other New England factories soon. By harnessing the capabilities of Massachusetts skilled manufacturers, we'll be able to get gear into the hands of our frontline workers faster. We still have much work to do to secure more supplies from both the national stockpile and from other supply chains, but we've always been impressed with the ingenuity of our residents.
We have been listening to the governor of Massachusetts, Charles Baker, and now we're going to go to the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who's beginning his news conference.
Emergency management next to Michael is Major General Raymond Shields from the Department of Military and Naval Affairs, Dr. Howard Zucker, Commissioner of Health, who you all know, Ken Rasky, who is the President and CEO of the Greater New York Hospital Association. To my left, Michael Dowling, President and CEO of Northwell Health. To his left, Larry Schwartz, former Secretary to the Governor, who's been volunteering to help us here. Michael Israel, President and CEO of Westchester Medical Center Network, and Deanne Creswell, Commissioner in New York City Emergency Management Department. Let me thank them all very much for being here. We just had a great meeting, which I'll refer to in a moment. Let me also wish everyone happy National Doctors Day. And this is a day that doctors are truly busy and truly stepping up to their oath and their passion and literally saving lives. So we honor all the doctors in the state of New York today. Let me also thank the people from the Javits Center, Alan Steele, who's the director here. Javits Center has done many magnificent exhibitions and transformations, and they never cease to amaze me, but this is a transformation that I don't think anyone could ever anticipate. 2,500 beds as an emergency hospital. It's a partnership between the state and the federal government, and I want to thank the federal government very much for what they've done. The Army Corps of Engineers did a fantastic job moving in here and getting everything set up as quickly as possible. It will become operational today, receiving the first few patients, and we'll start to run the facility, and then we'll take it from there. Let me go through a couple of facts to give you an update on where we are today, and then we'll take your questions. In terms of the numbers of cases, you see the curve continues to go up, 7195. You see the number of people tested continues to go up. This state is testing more people than any state in the United States, more per capita than China or South Korea. That is a good thing. We want to test. We want to find the positives. And we want to find the positives so we can isolate, stop the transmission. We tested 14,000 people yesterday. The number of cases continues to go up, 6,984. Total number of cases, 66,000 cases. And those numbers are daunting, to be sure. You see it's continuing to move across the state of New York. There's only one county now that does not have a COVID case. Anyone who says this situation is a New York City only situation is in a state of denial. You see this virus move across the state. You see the virus move across this nation. There is no American who is immune to this virus. I don't care if you live in Kansas. I don't care if you live in Texas. There is no American that is immune. What is happening to New York is not an anomaly. There's nothing about it, a New Yorker's immune system that is any different than any other American's immune system. So in many ways, New York is just a canary in the coal mine. What you see us going through here, you will see happening all across this country. So part of what we're doing here is not only serving New Yorkers, but we believe that we're dealing with this pandemic at a level, intensity, and density that no one has seen before. And hopefully we'll learn lessons here that we can then share with people across this nation. In terms of the overall numbers, 66,000 have tested positive, 9,500 people are currently hospitalized, 2,000 ICU patients, 4,000 patients are discharged. That's an increase of 632. You don't often focus on this line when we have these conversations, but people go into the hospital and people leave the hospital, and that's important to remember. We've dealt with some really deadly viruses before. We dealt with the Ebola virus. That's not what this is. Most people will get sick. Most people will get sick and stay home and have some symptoms. That's 80%. About 20% will get sick, need hospitalization, they'll feel better, and they'll leave. It tends to be those people who are acutely ill, have an underlying illness, who have the most problems. Most impacted states, New York, you see, is at 66,000. New Jersey is next with 13. California is 6,000. So we have 10 times the problem that California is dealing with. 2,739 deaths in the state of New York. Total of 148,000 cases. 2,739 deaths. That's a lot of loss. That's a lot of pain. That's a lot of tears. That's a lot of grief that people all across the state are feeling. 1,200 is up from 965 deaths. Yesterday, what you're seeing is people who have been on ventilators for a long period of time. The longer you're on a ventilator, the less likely you will ever come off that ventilator. And as we have now some period of time when people first entered the hospital and were first intubated, we're seeing that death number go up as the length of time on the ventilator increases. To keep it in perspective, the Johns Hopkins numbers are still instructive. We've been studying this since China. So 732 deaths, 34,000 worldwide. Total hospitalized, we're still looking for a pattern on these cases that are coming in. We're still looking for a pattern in the data. The number goes up, the number goes down. There's no doubt that the number is still increasing. There's also no doubt that the rate has slowed. We had a doubling of cases every 2 days, then a doubling every 3 days, then a doubling every 4 days, then every 5. We now have a doubling of cases every 6 days. So while the overall number is going up, the rate of doubling is actually down. The daily intubation rate is way up. Again, sometimes it's just an anomaly. There's no clear pattern, as you can see from those past several nights. Discharge rate, again, that by and large is going up. People come into the hospital, they stay for a period of time, number of days, and then they move on. But big picture is the situation is painfully clear now. There's no question what we're dealing with. There's no question as to the consequences. There's no question as to the grief and the loss of life. And there's no question about what we must do. There are only 2 missions. There are only 2 operations that we need to perform. First, the public has to be responsible. Stay at home. When I issued the stay-at-home order, it wasn't, it would be nice if you did. It is a mandate. Stay at home. If you're a non-essential worker, stay at home. If you leave the house, you're exposing yourself to danger. If you leave the house, you're exposing others to danger. You can get infected, go home and infect whoever is at home. So stay at home. I know the isolation can be boring and oppressive. It is better than the alternative. Life is options, right? Stay at home. That is the best option. If you are out, no proximity, 6 feet distancing. You don't want proximity to other people, and you want to stay away from places that are dense. Still, in New York City, you have too many places with too much density. I mean, I don't know how many different ways to make the same point. New York City parks, we made the point there's too much density. You want to go to the park, go to the park, but not in a dense area, not in playgrounds where you're playing basketball with other people. And I have said that New York City is trying to reduce the density in those playgrounds. Thus far, they have not been successful. If that continues, we'll take a mandatory action to close down playgrounds, as harsh as that sounds, but it can actually save people's lives. So that's mission one. Mission two, and this is going to be more and more clear as we go on. The frontline battle is in the healthcare system. The frontline battle is going to be hospitals across the city, across the state, and across this nation. That is where this battle is fought. It's that simple. You know exactly where it's coming. You know exactly where the enemy is going to attack. They're going to infect a large number of people. That number of people descend on the healthcare system. The healthcare system can't deal with that number of people. You overwhelm the healthcare system. That's what's happening. So, first step was flatten the curve, reduce the density, keep people home. We've done everything that we can possibly do there. Second step is don't let the hospital system get overwhelmed. The soldiers in this fight are our healthcare professionals. It's the doctors, it's the nurses, it's the people who are working in the hospitals, it's the aides. They are the soldiers who are fighting this battle for us. You know the expression, save our troops, quote unquote. In this battle, the troops are healthcare professionals. Those are the troops who are fighting this battle for us. We need to recruit more healthcare workers. We need to share healthcare professionals within this state and within this country. As governor of New York, I am asking healthcare professionals across the country, if you don't have a healthcare crisis in your community, please come help us in New York now. We need relief. We need relief for nurses who are working 12-hour shifts, one after the other after the other. We need relief for doctors. We need relief for attendants. So if you're not busy, come help us, please. And we will return the favor. We will return the favor. New York, yes, we have it now intensely. There will be a curve. New York at one point will be on the other side of the curve, and then there will be an intense issue somewhere else in the nation. And the New York way is to be helpful. So, help New York. We're the ones who are hit now. That's today, but tomorrow it's going to be somewhere else. Whether it's Detroit, whether it's New Orleans, it will work its way across the country. And this is the time for us to help one another. We need supplies desperately, and we're working on that. We just had a very good meeting where we discussed supplies. I want to thank Michael Evans from Alibaba, who's here with us today. I want to thank Elizabeth Jennings from the Asia Society, who's here with us today, who are helping us source supplies, because we're in a situation where you have 50 states all competing for supplies. The federal government is now also competing for supplies. Private hospitals are also competing for supplies. So we've created a situation where you literally have hundreds of entities looking to buy the same exact materials, basically from the same place, which is China. ironically enough. And we're fighting amongst ourselves. We're competing amongst ourselves. We're driving the prices up. When we started buying ventilators, they were under $20,000. The ventilators are now over $50,000 if you can find them. The ventilators didn't change that much in 2 weeks. The prices went up because literally we are driving the prices up. But we need to give our front line, our healthcare professionals, the supplies they need, and we need to do it now. Our rule here in New York has been plan forward to get ahead of the problem. The old expression is don't fight the last battle. This virus has been ahead of us from day one. We have been playing catch up from day one. You never win playing catch up. Get ahead of the problem. Don't fight today's fight. Plan for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now when you're going to have the apex, and make sure that we're in a position to win the battle when the battle is truly drawn, which is going to be at the apex. That's why we are preparing stockpiles now. We're building a stockpile. The word stockpile, by definition, means not for immediate use. It means you're preparing for a battle to come. And you have to have the equipment, and you have to have it now. I've done disaster work all across the nation. I can tell you this. If you wait to prepare for the storm to hit, it is too late, my friends. You have to prepare before the storm hits. And in this case, the storm is when you hit that high point, when you hit that apex. How do you know when you're going to get there? You don't. There is no crystal ball. But there is science, and there is data, and there are health professionals who have studied this virus and its progress since China. We now have months of data. Listen to the scientists, listen to the mental health, the healthcare professionals, and follow the data, and that's what we're doing here in New York. We just had a great meeting where we brought the healthcare system from across the state of New York together to come up with one coordinated plan. Not private hospitals and public hospitals, not New York City hospitals and Long Island hospitals and Westchester hospitals and upstate hospitals, not big hospitals and small hospitals. The entire healthcare system convened, coordinated, working as one for the first time in decades. No one can ever remember the way we have deployed and coordinated like this. Why? Because this is a statewide battle. And we want to make sure that we are all coordinated and we are all working together. And that's exactly what we've accomplished at this meeting. No politics, no partisanship, no division. There is no time for that, not in this state, not in this nation. This is a deadly, serious situation. And frankly, it's more important than politics. And it's more important than partisanship. And if there is division at this time, the virus will defeat us. If there was ever a moment for unity, this, my friends, is the moment. In this situation, there are no red states and there are no blue states and there are no red casualties and there are no blue casualties. It's red, white, and blue. This virus doesn't discriminate. It attacks everyone and it attacks everywhere. The president said this is a war. I agree with that. This is a war. Then let's act that way. And let's act that way now. And let's show a commonality and a mutuality and a unity that this country hasn't seen in decades. Because the Lord knows we need it today more than ever before. Questions, comments?
fact that the equipment might be going out the back door, might not be being used in the proper fashion. I'm curious if you can respond to that directly in terms of what he was implying.
Yeah, the question is that the president suggested that PPE equipment may be going out the back door. First, there is a warehouse in Edison, New Jersey. It's the New York City warehouse. We're creating a stockpile for someone to say, well, the warehouse has equipment in it. You should be using that equipment today. That defies the basic concept of planning and the basic operation that we have to have working, not just in this state, but across the country. If you are not preparing for the apex and for the high point, you are missing the entire point of the operation. It is a fundamental blunder to only prepare for today. That's why, in some ways, we are where we are. We've been behind this virus from day one. You have the scientists and the data projections showing you a curve. The curve goes like this. You're over here. Prepare for the high point of the curve and do it now. When are you going to do it? The night before? What am I going to tell the hospitals when they call up and they say, we just had an influx of 50% more people, and we need more equipment and we need more ventilators? Sorry? So the whole stockpile concept is to prepare for the future. In terms of a suggestion that the PPE equipment is not going to a correct place, I don't know what that means. I don't know what he's trying to say. If he wants to make an accusation, then let him make an accusation. But I don't know what he's trying to say by inference. We just had a conversation about exactly that. In New York City, there are basically two systems. There's what's called the Greater New York Hospital Association. Ken Rasky represents it. It's basically the private voluntary hospitals, Mount Sinai, Columbia, etc. Then there's the Health and Hospitals Corporation, which are the public hospitals. You have those two systems. We just discussed that those two systems have to, in this situation, undertake a balancing that they probably have never had to do before. In other words, you have 11 public hospitals. One hospital starts to get overrun. There's a high load in one hospital. Before that happens, transfer people to one of the hospitals that has more vacancies and less load. Distribute the load among those public hospitals and do it immediately. Do it on a daily basis. One hospital is starting to overload, distribute, transfer. Same thing with the Greater New York Hospital Association. And then we said, take it a step further. Once one system is near capacity, then the two systems will work together to share the load. And we just discussed that, and we all agreed to do it. There are no legal barriers. If a hospital, let's stay with the public system, because the public system, I think, is going to face the greatest stress. If a public hospital starts to get overloaded, transfer to another hospital with less of a load. I don't believe there are any restrictions. Ken Rasky, who's the expert on this, I'd ask him to
thank you, Governor,
chime in.
To that fine question. We're going to work as one cohesive family system throughout New York, and New York is beyond the city itself. It's including the downstate area, both the island as well as Westchester. And I think what we're going to see is that balancing that the governor is talking about. Balance within the system, balance without the system, beyond it, as we go forward as we encounter more and more stress. With each day that goes on, the stress points will increase. And as a result, that balancing is absolutely essential. And because of the leadership of the governor, it is clear to everybody that we are going to be one cohesive family in tackling this.
Okay, we've been listening to Governor Andrew Cuomo of the state of New York with his now daily news conference. He started out with some statistics, which on the one hand showed that the number of cases of coronavirus is going up in the state. At the same time, he said that the testing is really higher per capita than either in China or South Korea. And he also said that the rate of increase is going down. They were doubling every 2 days. Now they're down to doubling every 6 days. And then he explained about what he called the battle to come and how they are stockpiling equipment because they think the apex is still 2 to 4 weeks away. And they're getting ready for that coming down the pike. So that has been Governor Andrew Cuomo of the state of New York explaining the state of the coronavirus in the state. And now we turn to Charlie Pellet for a Biz Flash.
All right, thank you very much. And we are well off our session highs right now. Stocks holding on to gains, though, with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all rallying. Stocks are advancing as investors see glimmers of optimism in efforts to deliver rapid virus testing. The dollar rose. Right now, the Dow is up 398 points. That is a gain of 1.8%. S&P 500 index up 57 points, a gain of 2.3%. And NASDAQ is up 207 points for the NASDAQ Composite Index. That is a gain right now of 2.76%. The 10-year's up 8/30 seconds, yield 0.64%. Gold is retreating 0.6% right now. Gold $16.18 the ounce. Crude, a major story as I speak. It is back below $20 a barrel. Talking about West Texas intermediate crude down 7.2%. A lot of oil, nowhere to put it. WTI and also little demand. WTI down $1.53 a barrel right now at $19.99 on West Texas intermediate crude. Well, some of the other stories that we're following, Abbott Lab shares are advancing after the company unveiled a coronavirus test that can tell if someone is infected in as little as 5 minutes and is so small and portable it can be used in almost any healthcare setting. Abbott Lab shares, they're up now by 6.9%. The 10-year, the yield there 0.64%. S&P up 58, up 2.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is the Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. I'm David Weston. So Charlie gave us the headlines, but let's dive below those headlines with respect to the markets at least. And for that, we turn to Sarah Ponczak. She is Bloomberg Cross Asset Reporter. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. It looks like we have another update thus far, at least, in the equity markets.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It really is pretty notable. Coming into today, there were a lot of investors who were looking at the sell-off that we're seeing in oil prices right now. You have WTI crude oil below $20 right now as we speak. And a lot of investors were saying that we would likely see markets under pressure today, particularly after that very, very strong rally that we saw last week, as we started to see potentially what would be a retest of the lows. And we're not seeing that. You have markets up for a fourth day in 5, a very strong rebound. Notable that if you look at a basket of some of the most shorted stocks today, those are actually lower on the day, roughly flat for the most part. So this isn't a short covering rally. And even last week, when we did see the S&P have its best day since the days of the global financial crisis, that same basket only performed the same amount, just as well as the S&P 500. So this really isn't much of a short squeeze. It seems like some are starting to try to call the bottom here.
Well, that's very hopeful. I may hold you to that, Sarah, actually. And I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but what's the date today? The 30th? What are we coming up to? The end of the quarter? Or is there a chance that this is some sort of rebalancing of portfolios?
There is. It's not just the end of the quarter. It's also the end of the month. Last week, J.P. Morgan said that there could be $850 billion at work as it relates to pension rebalancing because stocks had sold off so much, bonds had rallied so much. You need those portfolios to rejigger to get back to how they should be looking. Now, I'm not saying that the bottom is in by any means. I'm saying there are a good amount of strategists and investors out there who are now actually speaking about how this could possibly be the start of something better. Still, though, it very much is the case that you typically only see extremely strong rallies like the ones that we saw last week in the middle of bear markets. So for every single optimist that you have right now saying maybe this is the start of something real, you have plenty of pessimists saying this is only a bear market bounce.
But people aren't just buying stocks, they're also buying bonds.
Right. So we do see some buying of bonds today. So not much. You see the 10-year now at 65 basis points or so. But we do see gold down as well. So this is not your typical risk on day because the fact that you are seeing a bit of selling in gold. Sure, that would be risk on, but you still do see modest buying in the bond market as well. So that does raise a bit of a question. That's something we've seen earlier on in the sell-off too. On the days that you had seen bounces in the stock market, that was met with buying in treasuries as well, which raises a question mark over the validity or how long a bounce can really sustain itself for. So there are certainly still a lot of question marks about over what is going on here in the stock market, and you certainly have to be cautious, particularly because this is really going to trace whatever happens with the virus. And sure, there are investors, particularly Evercore ISI today, pointing to the fact that we've seen the curve starting to slow in areas of Europe. We had Italy, for example, post the lowest number of new cases in 2 weeks. But until we really get more validity on what's happening with the coronavirus, it's really hard to know where the stock market heads to next.
Okay, so you did very, very well on both equities and bonds. Explain oil to me. Because as you said, it's below 20 in the WTI now. President Trump said he's going to call President Putin and fix the whole thing. I guess the oil markets didn't quite believe him?
He did. So oil's been under an immense amount of pressure. And we have to remember that back when this really all started, there were calls from many of the Wall Street shops for sub-20 oil. Now, we never really got there. Yeah. We've been slowly making our way down there, and today we're seeing a bit of capitulation. You look at Brent oil down 10% at the moment, WTI down 8% to $19.72 a barrel. I mean, you just think about the state of the world right now. You think about what's happening with airlines. You think about what's happening with a lot of the transportation companies. I mean, oil is seeing a significant drop in demand. Some estimates are actually showing that the grounding of a lot of aircrafts right now is contributing to a drop of 5 million barrels a day in consumption alone. So you have that on one side. There's also concerns as it relates to supply with OPEC. So it really is yet to be seen, but we have to remember that there were calls for sub-20 oil saying that such a hit to demand could really cause oil to take a hit, and we're now seeing this capitulation at least today.
And Sarah Ponczek, what about the VIX? Am I getting excited because it has a 5 in front of it instead of a 6 or a 7 or even an 8?
That says a lot about where we are right now. The fact that the VIX is at 58.
Exactly.
We're like, things are calming down.
I'm feeling good about 58 and change, yeah.
Yeah, but something to pay attention to. So there is a VIX counterpart, you could say, in the bond market, and that's the Bank of America Move Index. So last week we actually saw the Move Index come down by the most since 2009. And some are saying that because we're seeing volatility die down in the bond market, maybe that means that the stock market is next. Maybe we will continue to see the VIX subside, maybe even sport a 4 handle eventually. That would be a low nowadays after we saw it shoot above 80. The highest level on record. But still, if you were to look at options markets, Mandy Zhu, she's over at Credit Suisse, she actually pointed out that we continue to see investors in the options market up their hedges. So they're not necessarily chasing this rally higher. Rather, in the options market, we're seeing more positioning for a further sell-off.
Still, Sarah, you gave us a little ray of optimism there. That was terrific. That was Sarah Ponczek. She is our Bloomberg Cross Asset reporter. And now it's time to get a market check from Charlie Pellet. Charlie?
Hi, thank you very much, David Weston. Happy Monday. Here's what's going on. Stocks off their session highs, but it is an update here with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing right now. S&P 500 index up for the 4th time in 5 days, even after a weekend full of negative pandemic news as President Trump extended recommendations aimed at inhibiting the spread. S&P up now by 59 points. That is a gain of 2.3%. We've got the Dow up 407 points, up 1.9%, and NASDAQ up 210. That is a gain of 2.8%. 10 years up 4 30 seconds, yield 0.66%. Gold Gold is down 0.6%, $16.19 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude tumbling to an 18-year low as coronavirus lockdowns cascade through the world's largest economies, leaving the market overwhelmed by cratering demand and a ballooning surplus. WTI now down by 8.1%, $19.77 the barrel. Brent is at $22.28 for a barrel of Brent. That is a drop now of 10.6%. Again, recapping, equities higher here with the S&P up now by 61, up 2.4%. Gold down 0.6%, $16.18 the ounce. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That, David Weston, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Live from New York, this is Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. President Trump criticized General Motors and its CEO, Mary Barra, by name and said he'd order the company to manufacture respirators. He's now said things that are being really worked out. He's backed off it a bit, but it does raise questions about just how sweeping the president's powers are under the Defense Production Act. We're joined now by an expert. He is Eric Crusius. He's a partner in the law firm of Holland & Knight, and he specializes in government contract law. So, Eric, thank you so much for joining us here. It's a little unclear to me exactly what the president has invoked or hasn't invoked, but what are his powers under the act?
Well, thanks for having me, too. I think a lot of people are putting a little bit more stock into the Defense Production Act, more so than maybe it has. It's certainly a powerful tool that the president has, but it's not all-encompassing powerful, where the president can just order certain manufacturers to make certain things at any given time without any, with respect to even if they don't make it or if they don't have a price set for it and things like that. So it is pretty powerful where the government can come in and say, hey, you're making this product right here. We're going to be first in line to get that product now. But what they can't come in and do and say is come in and say, hey, you don't make this product, but we're going to make you make this product now. So with respect to GM, of course, they don't make ventilators right now, so there's somewhat limited as far as what the government can do to GM. Once they start making ventilators, that might change.
Well, that makes it sound like it's not particularly useful right now in this situation, or maybe it is in ways that I don't anticipate, because, I mean, I'm assuming the people who regularly make ventilators are making about as many of them as they can, as fast as they can. So what can the president do to up the production of ventilators?
So there's a couple of things that the president can actually do. One of the titles under the Defense Production Act allows the government to come in and guarantee loans and direct loans to companies that are making products like this. They could also issue purchase commitments. I think one thing that private industry has problems with sometimes is the fact that the government comes in during an emergency and says we need a million ventilators, for instance. And then all of a sudden the crisis passes and the government can renege on that million ventilator order, leaving industry holding the bag. So one thing the Defense Production Act can do is actually give that purchase commitment in advance to encourage industry to make those ventilators. It could also actually purchase and install equipment into private industry's factories. So, for instance, if industry has extra factory space, the government can come in and buy that equipment to kind of put that capital up front and allow and lower that kind of risk that contractors can have when making products like this.
What about things perhaps less complex than ventilators? What about things like personal protective equipment, things like those N95 masks or the PAPR units? Because I talked to Richard Trumka, the head of AFL-CIO, last week, and he said he thought that the Defense Production Act could be used to really require more manufacture of that gear that the healthcare workers need so badly.
One thing it can do, and he's not entirely incorrect on that for sure, because one thing it can do is it's a lot more carrot than stick, so to speak, where you're providing resources to contractors and manufacturers so they can ramp up more quickly. The manufacturers can only do what they can do with the resources that they have. So, one thing that the government can do is, like I said, cut first in line and enable them to get whatever comes off the product line and get it into the hands of the folks who really need it. That will interfere, of course, with the contracts that those contractors already have with existing entities or even other government agencies. But the government can encourage to be the first one, or can really require themselves to be the first one in line for these ventilators or these respirators or whatever the product is. So more gets in the hands of the people who need them right away.
Yeah, and there's a question, as you're suggesting, of allocation. I also spoke with the head of an association of medical device manufacturers who said that he really needs, in fact, he's written a letter to say, can't we have FEMA really take over allocation of equipment, of supplies that are in short supply, and really just direct it. Because right now, as I understand, in some places, we have states and localities and hospitals and the federal government all contending over the same materials.
Yeah, it's almost a little bit like the Hunger Games, unfortunately, because there are these local and state and federal and even international governments that are all competing for the same products. And there are allocation provisions within the Defense Production Act that essentially allow the government to reserve product ahead of time. That could be a really streamlined way to kind of allow all these competing entities to cooperate with each other and kind of buy from the same pot, instead of having it, like I said, like a game of Hunger Games. But allocation actions need a separate authorization by HHS to do, which as of now, I don't think that they've given.
But it's interesting, as I understand what you're saying, under the Defense Production Act, provided there was this particular determination by HHS, the federal government could say, okay, all those ventilators or all those masks or all of those PAPRs, they don't go anywhere unless we tell you where they go.
That's exactly correct. Yeah, they have the right to come in and say, these are all ours for now because of these findings that we've made. We're in a national emergency. HHS has the power with health resources to do this, and then just kind of organize essentially the supply chain so it's not so much scattershot like it is today.
As far as you know, has the federal government ever done that in any context before?
I've not seen it before, especially under their health resources allocation. No.
Fascinating. Are there other powers of the U.S. government that should be used right now that aren't being used?
There's a couple. One is under the Defense Production Act. It has the power to kind of encourage companies to get together and share resources. Usually that would bring up antitrust implications, but sometimes they could, in some ways that can encourage, by encouraging the companies to work together, you can really increase output.
Okay, Eric, thank you so much. It was really interesting. Eric Crusius, he's a partner in the law firm of Holland and Knight. That's going to do it for Balance of Power for today on Bloomberg Radio. Coming up is going to be Bloomberg Business Week. This is Bloomberg.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
TuneIn makes it easy to be a part of the conversation. Just make sure push notifications are enabled to hear about breaking news and trending topics from around the sports world. You'll also get custom recommendations of podcasts and radio stations covering the sports and teams you care about.
On this week's On the Media, we are awash in messages, but some messengers are more effective than others.
Ventilators, ventilators, ventilators. We need 30,000.
Meanwhile, some media outlets choose not to air the president's press briefings live, and media critics ponder what's the right balance between good information and all information. All that and more on this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast on TuneIn today.
The most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President, Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
A pack needs someone to follow.
It's got to be important for somebody to have a breakout moment.
Don't look now, but they're behind you.
Imports declined 2.8%.
Bloomberg Daybreak.
Sources tell us that agreement is expected to include commitments on U.S. intellectual property.
With Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager.
Could we see that play into the results and the forward guidance?
Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, The world is listening. From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from our homes in New York and New Jersey, also streaming on YouTube. Welcome to Bloomberg Business Week. It is Monday, March 30th, 2020. I'm Carol Masser, along with my co-host Jason Kelly. And Jason, we've got stocks rallying. Increasingly, we see the world, the U.S., accepting the new reality of the impact of the virus and all of the efforts to combat both the health and economic crisis, creating hope, it feels like, a little bit among investors.
Well, it feels like over the weekend, especially capping it off with what we heard from the president yesterday, extending this stay-at-home strong suggestion, as it were, not quite a mandate, but pretty close, through April, set a different tone as we went into this week. We certainly felt it at my house, I feel like, and probably yours as well. And it feels like the markets are grabbing on to that little bit of stability as we try and start to see a way through this.
All right, we're going to talk about all of this over the next couple of hours. First up, let's get a check on your top business stories and a look at that trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Monday to you both. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all higher. Off our session highs, though, right now, but a 58-point jump in the S&P 500 index. That's a gain of 2.3%. The Dow is up 380 points now, up 1.8%. NASDAQ up 204. That is a gain of 2.7%. The 10-year up 230 seconds with a yield of 0.66%. Gold is down 1% right now, $16.12 the ounce. Crude, an ongoing major story, now at $19.49 a barrel. WTI is dropping now by 9.3%. We've got a loss in demand and also a lot of oil on the market. That's why WTI dropping now by 9.3%. Recapping equities higher, S&P up 54, a gain there of 2.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thank you so much. Let's head down to Virginia now. The governor there, Ralph Northam, speaking to the press.
Virginia, in the past few weeks, we have seen people doing the right thing to help their neighbors. We have seen people making masks to help our medical personnel. We've seen teachers driving through their school neighborhoods so their students can see them and feel connected. We've had more than 1,600 volunteers apply to our Virginia Medical Reserve Corps just since last Wednesday. Please visit VAMRC.org if you are able or willing to help. All of these things make me so proud to be a Virginian. In this difficult time, Virginians are stepping up to support their neighbors and their communities. We've also seen people adhering to the rules about...
It's from Virginia Governor Ralph Northam. We're having a little bit of problem with the feed, but obviously the nation's governors, Carol, definitely stepping to the fore here. We've seen this over the past couple weeks, but every day it seems, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, we are hearing directly from the nation's governors.
Well, and listen, these are the folks that are on the front lines, right? So are seeing firsthand the successes as well as the stresses that are on our system right now. And so we really do need to look to what they are saying to get an idea of how we are getting either control of this, ahead of this, and it also is going to be helpful for other states who will be facing this as well. All right, let's also set the Business Week agenda. Got to talk a little bit about the market trade here. Sarah Ponzek is with us, cross-asset reporter at Bloomberg News. She's on the phone in New York City. Dave Wilson, our stocks editor at Bloomberg News, on the phone from New Jersey. So, Sarah, let's start with you. What kind of interesting moves are you seeing in the trade today?
So So honestly, it's really shocking in a way that you have oil prices, WTI crude oil as we speak, below $20 a barrel coming into the trading day. There were a lot of warnings, a lot of research notes, emails going around saying this could be another rough day in the markets, considering the extremely large gains, that rally that we saw last week. And now oil plunging yet again. Yet you look at the market and we see equities higher for a fourth day in 5. So it really is pretty striking, the fact that we're seeing this resilience once again, and you have the likes of JP Morgan, cross-asset strategists, saying that maybe the lows truly are in, and even Mike Wilson, who's been bearish, he was on Bloomberg Television this morning, and he said he doesn't even think that we will go back and retest those lows. Now, of course, you have many people on the other end of the spectrum, too, saying that this is just a bear market bounce, but the resiliency today does make you at least question it.
All right, Dave Wilson, come on in here. Set the scene for us from your perspective. You're looking at sectors. You're looking at individual names. What do you see in this trade that feels different from what we've seen over the last couple of weeks?
Frankly, not a whole lot. I mean, you talk about energy stocks being down. We've gotten used to the idea since last year that energy has been a weak sister when you look at the main industry groups in the S&P 500. And when you see what's up today, technology stocks, and we've certainly seen them at the forefront of the market's performance, even in this current bear market. I'll have more about that next hour with my chart of the day. And on top of that, the defensive areas, healthcare, utilities, the makers of consumer staples, food, beverage, tobacco doing relatively well. Real estate is a bit of an exception today because it's, little changed and you're finding issues. I mean, let's face it, we're coming up on April 1st. We already know the Cheesecake Factory isn't going to be paying rent on any of their restaurants, and you got to presume there are going to be a whole lot of other companies following their example.
Can I just say
why real estate's hurting.
My husband and I have been talking about that. That's remarkable because anytime you've ever gone to a Cheesecake Factory, it is packed. The lines are out the door. So if a chain like that is having troubles, it just is indicative of just so many of those independently owned restaurants. It's very clear how troubling this time is going to be for them. I think it's interesting. And David speaks to a larger real estate story, commercial and even residential. If folks aren't able to pay their mortgage or if businesses aren't able to pay their rent, that has a ripple effect through our economy.
Oh, it absolutely does. And we've already seen that play out with what they call the mortgage REITs, real estate investment trusts that either lend money for properties or buy mortgage-backed securities. And they have really taken a hit this month, much more so than the broader market. And I just want to point out, with Cheesecake Factory, the shares are actually higher today. Wow. And you had a firm, Guggenheim, come in and raise their 12 months price estimate by 15% to $30 a share. They figure the Cheesecake Factory is going to be okay in the long run once they get past the issues in front of them now that are keeping them from, at least in their own plans, from paying the rent.
And so, Sarah Ponczak, still with us. Help us understand whether that is consistent across the trade and investors' mindset at this point. Are people just saying, all right, well, let's see what's going to be good in the long term and just look past the next 60 days?
Well, what's really standing out to me today, and I think is a little bit different, is the fact that we're back to that norm where you have tech outperforming once again. You have healthcare outperforming once again, particularly the likes of Abbott Labs, also Johnson & Johnson. But you're back to that scenario where the likes of Boeing, your airlines, your transport companies are the ones falling. And that is a bit telling because if you were to look, there's a basket that Goldman Sachs tracks of the most shorted stocks. And today it's actually down, but very, very slightly. So you're not seeing this giant rally in the stocks that were beaten up most. So you're not seeing this huge short squeeze in the market, which we did see in some of those major rallies last week. So we're back to this more sustainable buying of the names that people have loved over the past 10 years, over the past bull market.
Right.
And I think that's a bit telling about the structure of the rally today.
All right, Sarah Ponczak, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. Sarah Ponczak is a cross-asset reporter for Bloomberg. Joining us from New York City, Dave Wilson. We are going to talk to him next hour, as he alluded to, for his chart of the day. And Carol, coming up, we're going to look at emerging markets. We're also going to have a conversation with retired General Stanley McChrystal, obviously understanding the front lines of a crisis like this.
Yeah, totally looking forward to that because he has certainly dealt with his own crises, and he is now leading the efforts in Boston to deal with the virus. So looking forward to what he has to say. All right, let's get a check on world and national news headlines. For that, let's turn things over to Bob Moon. He's joining us now. Hey, Bob.
Carol, thank you. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio was on hand today for the arrival of the U.S. Navy hospital ship Comfort with 1,000 beds for non-coronavirus patients. The mayor praised the rapid timing